Chapter 583. Jing Yuan was also a shrewd man. When he heard that Ding Nan was going to practice the yin-yang integration technique with him, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes showed strong resistance and hostility. Go to the internet. For a moment, Jing Yuan was very suspicious. LV Fengping used to be a very coquettish woman. She had always been very active in practicing the yin-yang integration technique, but since she had occupied this body, her temperament had changed greatly. Is she Pinger or not? Jing Yuan looked at Ding Nan in bewilderment. His eyes narrowed more and more, and a strong killing intent gradually appeared in them. Seeing Jing Yuan's reaction, Ding Nan's heart suddenly trembled. She knew that she was no match for him. Even though he was seriously injured at this time, who knew what other tricks he had up his sleeve? Ding Nan had an idea and immediately said with a charming smile, "Master, do you want to practice the yin-yang integration technique with Pinger?" "That's great." "But..." Jing Yuan stared at her coldly. "But what?" Ding Nan nestled up to Jing Yuan in an enchanting manner and said charmingly, "Master, your body is so weak now. Aren't you afraid that I'll suck you dry?" Jing Yuan stared at Ding Nan. After a long time, he laughed and said, "Do you think I'm old?" Ding Nan smiled charmingly and said, "Of course I'm old, but Pinger is worried about you. As the saying goes, beauty is a source of calamity." Seeing Ding Nan acting coquettishly, Jing Yuan's original doubts suddenly dissipated a lot. He laughed and said, "What you said is not unreasonable." As he spoke, he looked at Alba, only to see that although Alba was a Western woman, her pelvic bones were tightly locked and her eyebrows were not open. Obviously, she was a virgin. What was more rare was that her eyes were full of vitality. In addition, she didn't know any cultivation techniques, so she was simply the best cauldron for plucking. Jing Yuan was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Well, I'll let you go today. I want to have a taste of this foreign girl today." As he said this, he got up and walked toward Alba step by step. Although Ding Nan had successfully dispelled Jing Yuan's doubts, she hadn't expected that he would change his target and target Alba again. She was shocked and shouted, "Master!" Jing Yuan tilted his head slightly and said meaningfully, "Why, do you think I can't deal with a girl who hasn't even reached the Zhuji phase?" When Ding Nan heard this, she suddenly swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She forced a smile and said, "Master, what are you talking about?" "I mean, the Caucasian is very powerful. Be careful." He walked over to Alba, grabbed her chin with one hand, and said with a proud smile, "Little girl, serve me well. Maybe if I'm happy, I'll accept you as my disciple." After that, he took Alba and was about to walk into the inner room. Alba was not a fool. Although she couldn't understand the conversation between Ding Nan and Jing Yuan, she could see the look in the man's eyes when he was beastly. She suddenly struggled violently and shouted at Ding Nan in horror, "Help, help me." Ding Nan watched helplessly as Alba was carried on Jing Yuan's shoulder and taken into the inner room. She gritted her teeth and turned her face away, not wanting to watch this scene anymore. However, Alba's cries kept coming from the inner room, cutting Ding Nan's eardrums and heart like a sharp knife. "Help! Oh my God, is no one going to save me? Don't you have any brothers and sisters? If one day you see them being insulted like this, will you stand by and watch? Didn't you promise me that you wouldn't hurt me? You liar! You liar! You just said that you have a man you love. Do you know why he hates you? Just because you did such a thing. Do you still have any humanity? Do you still have a conscience? If he knows what you've done, how will you face him in the future?" Alba's screams almost tore Ding Nan apart. She instantly remembered that she had planned to frame Zhou Qin, but she had been framed by Zhou Qin. She had cried in despair in the room. Ding Nan suddenly seemed to understand why Zhou Qin had suddenly turned around at that time and saved her from the clutches of He Shao. Could it be because I had cried and said something like, "How will you face him in the future?" Ding Nan's heart trembled violently. There seemed to be a voice in her mind shouting crazily, if he finds out what you've done in the future, do you still expect him to look you in the eye? It's useless. Even if you become a golden immortal, it's useless. Li Yundong won't even look at you, she thought. At this moment, Alba suddenly let out a miserable scream. Ding Nan suddenly trembled all over. She gritted her teeth, immediately took out the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, and rushed into the stone room. However, when Ding Nan rushed to the door, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She took a deep breath and quickly calmed down. She even unbuttoned 2 buttons on her chest, revealing a snow-white chest and a deep ravine. After Ding Nan tidied herself up, she walked into the stone room and saw Zheng Yuan panting as he dealt with Alba, who was struggling hard. If it had been in the past, Alba would have been exhausted long ago, but she had just been transformed by the Diyuan Jin Dan, so her strength was far greater than that of an ordinary person. In addition, Zheng Yuan had been seriously injured before, and he was unwilling to waste his essence qi to control Alba with magic. As a result, he had forced himself on her and made himself quite embarrassed. Zheng Yuan felt someone coming from behind him. He turned his head warily, only to see Ding Nan standing behind him in a seductive manner. He was stunned and asked, "Pinger, what are you doing here?" Ding Nan deliberately covered her mouth and laughed. "I heard that there was too much noise here, so I came to help you, master." Zheng Yuan smiled awkwardly and said, "This foreign girl is really strong. You came at the right time. Help me hold her down." Ding Nan saw that Alba's clothes were disheveled and her eyes were glaring at her as if they were about to spit fire, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked over to Zheng Yuan with a charming smile, put one hand on his shoulder, and pressed the other on Alba's wrist. She said with a smile, "Master, I'll watch the battle from the side." Seeing that Ding Nan was really willing to help, Zheng Yuan was overjoyed and his doubts and vigilance disappeared. He laughed and said, "My good disciple, when I recover my strength, I'll let you participate in the battle in person." Haha. With Ding Nan's help, Zheng Yuan was about to get carried away when he suddenly felt a numbness in his waist. He couldn't help looking back at Ding Nan and touching his back. With this touch, Zheng Yuan felt a cold metal object. Of course, Zheng Yuan knew what it was. It was the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, which specialized in absorbing the essence and blood of people's souls. Zheng Yuan's whole body trembled. He looked at Ding Nan with his mouth wide open and said in shock and anger, Are you crazy?" Ding Nan saw that Zheng Yuan's waist had been pierced by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, but not only did he not fall, his essence and blood were not being sucked away by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Shocked, she immediately slapped Zheng Yuan with her palm. Seeing that he was in a life-and-death situation, Zheng Yuan didn't care about saving his Jinqi and spiritual energy. He immediately slapped Ding Nan with his palm. As soon as their palms collided, they were both sent flying more than 2 meters away. Although Zheng Yuan's cultivation had not broken through to the Jinshan phase for decades, his strength was not something that ordinary cultivators could compare with. Although his body had been broken by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, he had used his many years of solid foundation to lock his essence and blood to prevent it from being sucked away. Zheng Yuan looked at Ding Nan in disbelief and asked in a trembling voice, "Pinger, what are you doing?" Ding Nan gritted her teeth and sneered. "Bah, who's your Pinger?" Zheng Yuan's expression changed dramatically. He seemed to have figured out all the problems at once, and his face suddenly became extremely ferocious. "So that's how it is, that's how it is. It turns out that I was right before. Little girl, you're so scheming and scheming." Ding Nan sneered and stared at Zheng Yuan vigilantly and nervously, not saying anything. Zheng Yuan grinned hideously and said, "Do you think a mere threaded hairpin of soul traversal can deal with me? Humph. You deceived your master and destroyed your ancestors. Stop dreaming." As he said this, he was about to jump out of the cave. But just as he was about to move, Alba, who was next to him, suddenly pounced on him. Like a mad beast, she bumped into Zheng Yuan. At this time, Zheng Yuan had focused all his energy on resisting the powerful suction of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, and his attention was focused on Ding Nan. How could he have noticed Alba? If this had happened in normal times, Jing Yuan would have been able to send Alba flying more than 10 meters away with a wave of his sleeve, but at this time, Jing Yuan only felt his whole body shake. Most importantly, Alba's shoulder had hit the threaded hairpin of soul traversal on his waist. This time, Jing Yuan could no longer control himself, and all the essence and blood in his body were quickly absorbed by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Jing Yuan suddenly let out an earth-shattering howl, and his skin quickly withered and turned yellow. Seeing this scene, Alba was so scared that her whole body went limp. She screamed and crawled away on all fours. Jing Yuan looked at Ding Nan in pain and shouted unwillingly, "You deceived your master and destroyed your ancestors. I won't let you go." Ding Nan gritted her teeth and sneered. "I'm not your disciple. How can I deceive my master and destroy my ancestors?" Jing Yuan laughed wildly. "I've been keeping you by my side these days. Who in the cultivation world doesn't know that you're my disciple? If they find out that you deceived your own master and killed him, I'm afraid that there will be no place for you in this world. The first iron law of the cultivation world is that you can't use magic and powerful magical weapons on secular mortals, but do you know what the second iron law of the cultivation world is? It's that you can't deceive your master and destroy your ancestors. You will have a divine punishment." As Jing Yuan shouted wildly, the essence and blood in his body were constantly being absorbed by the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. His originally smooth and delicate skin had already become wrinkled like the bark of an old, withered tree. His whole body was like a skeleton, which was extremely terrifying. But the most terrifying thing was that at the moment of his death, Jing Yuan was still viciously cursing and shouting, "I'll wait for you. You will have a divine punishment. The cultivation world will never let go of any deceiving and destroying your ancestors." After Jing Yuan roared, his yang spirit and all his qi and blood were sucked clean. Finally, he was completely sucked into a dry corpse, and his body fell to the ground with a puff. Seeing a living person being sucked into a mummy in the blink of an eye, Ding Nan was also secretly horrified. More importantly, Jing Yuan's ferocious curse before his death made her feel uneasy and terrified. She had been in the cultivation world for a long time, so she naturally knew what it meant if others found out about deceiving and destroying one's ancestors. Seeing that Ding Nan was standing there in a daze for a moment, Alba cried and said to Ding Nan, "I knew you were a good person. Thank you for saving me. Thank you so much. God will protect you. I won't tell anyone about what happened today. I promise." But no matter what she said, Ding Nan remained motionless like a wooden man. Seeing that Ding Nan didn't respond, Alba asked tentatively, "Can I go now?" After asking, she saw that Ding Nan still didn't respond, so she finally got up and wanted to go out. But as soon as she reached the door, she heard Ding Nan say in a cold voice, "Where do you want to go?" Alba trembled all over and said in a trembling voice, I want to go home." Ding Nan slowly turned her face, and a strange and ferocious expression appeared on her pretty face. "You watched me kill John, and then you watched me kill my master. Where else do you think you want to go?" Alba was shocked. She knelt down with a thud and begged bitterly, "Let me go. I definitely won't tell anyone. I definitely won't tell anyone. Don't kill me." Ding Nan walked slowly to Alba's side. She lifted Alba's chin with her finger and said with a sneer, "From today on, I will be the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua, and you will be my new disciple. If one day I find that you want to escape, I will cut off your left leg if you take a step with your left leg, and your right leg if you take a step with your right leg. If you take a step with both legs, I will make it so that you will never be able to stand up again. Do you understand? As the saying goes, a woman's heart is the most poisonous." At this time, Alba was scared out of her wits. For a moment, she looked at Ding Nan in a daze. She suddenly felt that the beautiful woman in front of her was vicious and cruel, even more so than Jing Yuan. She felt as if she had just escaped from the claws of a wolf and immediately fell into the mouth of a tiger. Alba didn't know that her cultivation career would begin in such an unpleasant way, but what she didn't know was what kind of cultivation achievements she would achieve in the future, and what kind of terrifying, great cultivator her master, Ding Nan, would become. Chapter 584. When Ding Nan killed Jing Yuan with her own hands, Li Yundong was struggling to advance to the most important stage of cultivation. Go to the internet. At this time, Li Yundong had fallen into the deepest state of meditation. His whole body was surrounded by dazzling colorful brilliance, which was sometimes strong and sometimes weak. Ao Wushuang looked at him with bright eyes, looking quite nervous. Ao Wushuang knew that the Zhuji phase was a threshold to distinguish ordinary people from cultivators. Shintong was the threshold to distinguish an ordinary cultivator from a master cultivator, and Jinshan was the threshold to distinguish ordinary cultivators from great cultivators. Since ancient times, there had been countless cultivators in the Chinese cultivation world, but there were very few who had really cultivated to the Jinshan phase. In all dynasties, there had been cultivators who had cultivated to the Jinshan phase. They were all respected as great cultivators in the cultivation world, and the emperor would also look up to them. In the Song, Yuan and Ming dynasties, the leaders of the Zhengyi school and the Quanzhen school would be called Great Jinren by the emperor. Chinese people like to be big and happy, and they like to use the word big in almost everything. However, in the cultivation world, there were many people who called each other Jinren or cultivators, but it was rare to have the word big in front of it. In the cultivation world, there was a saying that when the word one and big were combined, it was called heaven, which meant that when a cultivator cultivated to the great cultivator realm, he would have the power to fight against heaven. The Zhuji phase was to cultivate the human body into Niden, so as to complete the transformation from an ordinary person to a cultivator. The Shintong was to give cultivators special power to cast spells. The Yang spirit was to give cultivators the ability to transcend life and death. The Jinshan meant that cultivators began to stand tall and have the power to challenge heaven. I didn't expect that a guy who has only cultivated for half a year is going to break through the Jinshan phase. Ao Wushuang looked at Li Yundong with emotion. She stared at him for a long time, and then moved her eyes to Su Chan. At this time, Su Chan had already shown her fox body. She lay quietly in a small corner, her body curled up into a ball, and her huge red fox tail almost covered her whole body. The end of her tail was slowly growing, from 3 tails to 4 tails, and from 4 tails to 5 tails. Ao Wushuang knew that although the cultivation of foxes was the same as that of humans, there were 9 levels of heaven. However, due to the special physique of the fox demon body, the number of tails of the fox was not the same as the realm of cultivators. For foxes, the 2 most difficult hurdles were the 3-tailed and 8-tailed ones. From a 2-tailed fox spirit to a 3-tailed demon fox, this meant that foxes could transform into human form and use the human body to cultivate further. If any species wanted to cultivate to a higher realm, they must first cultivate from their original form into a human form. This was because all living things in the world were born, and humans were the spiritual beings of all living things. Cultivating would yield twice the results with half the effort. A fox with 3 tails was equivalent to the Shintong realm of a cultivator and could use all kinds of magic or demonic arts. Breaking through to 4 tails meant breaking through to the primary Yin spirit realm of a cultivator. 5 tails was equivalent to the top Yin spirit realm of a cultivator. 6 tails was equivalent to the primary Yang spirit realm, and 7 tails was equivalent to the top Yang spirit realm. The biggest difference between a fox and a cultivator was that the fox's cultivation speed would slow down in the later stages. From 7 tails to 8 tails, it would realize a huge leap in strength. It would directly cross the Jinshan realm and break through to the early stage of the Thunder Retribution realm. For foxes, the gap between 7 tails and 8 tails was like the gap between a Yang spirit and a Jinshan master. However, although the gap between the Jinshan and the Thunder Retribution realms was huge, it was not as huge as the gap between the Yang spirit and the Jinshan, which was completely invincible. At this time, when the 7th tail slowly grew from the end of Su Chan's tail, Ao Wushuang suddenly became nervous. She stared at Su Chan's tail to see if there was any sign of the 8th tail growing. But after waiting for a while, Ao Wushuang saw that the fiery red fur on Su Chan's body began to slowly fade, and she gradually turned back into a human form. Ao Wushuang sighed in her heart and shook her head secretly. After a while, Su Chan was the first to wake up from her deep slumber with a groan. As soon as Su Chan opened her eyes and looked around, she found that she was in her former home in Shantang, Dongwu City. Not far away, Ao Wushuang was standing with a smile on her face. "Master?" Su Chan said with surprise and joy, "It's really you. I thought I was dreaming at that time. Did you save us?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and said with a smile, "No, it was the former leader Shibua who saved you." Su Chan was stunned. "Grandmaster? Lu Yi?" The little girl couldn't help but think of the last bolt of lightning that had magically struck down. She said in surprise, "Grandmaster is really not dead? He is a thunder retribution master?" "No, no way." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly. "Is it strange? He was a seven-tailed fox many years ago. After more than 10 years, he has become an 8-tailed fox. What's so strange about that?" Su Chan's eyes widened and she said incredulously, "But since he is a master of lightning retribution, why did he rather watch so many Shiji and Shimi die when our Fox Zen school was besieged and attacked?" The smile on Ao Wushuang's face faded. She took a deep breath and said slowly, "Chaner, there are some things that you'd better not know." Su Chan's face was full of anxiety. She quickly walked over to Ao Wushuang and argued, "But, Master, I don't need to know, but Yundong has been involved. It's because Grandmaster pretended to be dead that he inherited the position of leader of the Fox Zen school. Do you know how much he has sacrificed in order to be a good leader? Do you know how much he has to worry about the Fox Zen school every day?" Ao Wushuang fixed her eyes on Su Chan and suddenly smiled. "Sure enough, girls are more outgoing. Don't you think about your fellow disciples at all? Do you only think about Yundong?" Su Chan said unhappily, "I've never been in the Fox Zen school since I was a child. Whether I'm a member of the Fox Zen school or not, I don't care at all. I only care about Yundong. Where is Grandmaster? I want to see him. Why did he pretend to be dead? This is tantamount to the death of many Shiji and Shimi. And Yundong has been implicated. How many times has he been scolded because he is the leader of the Fox Zen school? If he weren't the leader of the Fox Zen school, I don't know how respected he would be now." Ao Wushuang sighed softly and said, "Silly girl, don't be silly. Even if he doesn't want to be the leader, as long as he is with you, he will still be scolded. Do you think that since ancient times, few people who have been a couple with us fox spirits have had a good ending?" Su Chan said unhappily, "Anyway, I'm going to ask Grandmaster. Even if he doesn't give the Fox Zen school an explanation, he has to give Yundong one." With that, she was in a hurry to go out. However, Ao Wushuang glared at her unhappily and shouted in a low voice, "Where are you going? Where are you going to find him? Do you know?" I don't know." Su Chan opened her mouth and swallowed her words helplessly. However, she soon became happy again. "Master, you must know, right?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, "I don't know. Now he is being watched by the bald donkeys of Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple every day. He takes them around in circles all day long. I can't find him unless he contacts me." Su Chan was stunned. Shiyuan Temple and Jinshan Temple? Why are they watching Grandmaster? Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Humph. How dare they not keep an eye on the 8-tailed fox? With Ao Wushuang's 9-tailed fox as an example, how dare they be careless? What if Lu Yi reaches the realm of the 9-tailed fox?" Su Chan asked in confusion, "But I've seen the abbot of Shiyuan Temple. Master Purin is an eminent monk. He shouldn't be such a person who can't distinguish between good and evil. Could it be that Grandmaster did something?" Ao Wushuang immediately shook her head and said, "Chaner, don't ask any more. Grandmaster has his own difficulties. If he wants to pretend to be dead, he has no choice. Besides, even if you don't believe him, you should believe me, right? Don't worry, he won't hurt you. Don't ask any more. All you know is that Grandmaster is still alive and he saved you. Su Chan lowered her head. She hesitated for a long time, then suddenly raised her head and asked, Master, can you tell Yundong about this? Ao Wushuang said flatly, no. Su Chan immediately jumped up and said in surprise, why not? What happened in Mount Qingqing last time was aimed at Yundong, but you didn't let me tell him. Why can't I tell him this time? Ao Wushuang shook her head like a rattle drum. She said, Chaner, you have to believe me. I won't hurt you. He is your lover, and I won't hurt him. If he finds out, it will be a disaster for him. Nothing good will happen. Su Chan said angrily, but if you hide it from him like this, what if something happens? How will he deal with it? Ao Wushuang said, he has now broken through the biggest gap between cultivators and broken through to the Jinshin phase. Although he is only at the primary level of the Jinshin, he has the Dharmakaya of the reincarnation of Wisdom King, the Mantra Mahamudra, and other powerful magical weapons. The power of the Jinshin will double. Even if he meets a top master of the Jinshin, he will have the power to fight. When he reaches the intermediate level of the Jinshin, he can even fight against a master of the Thunder Retribution. Hey, since ancient times, the Yang spirit can't beat the Jinshin. This is an iron law. But there has never been a saying that the Jinshin can't beat the Thunder Retribution. Ao Wushuang's face gradually softened. She said softly to Su Chan, so, don't worry. Your Yundong will be fine. I did this for your own good. Su Chan looked at Ao Wushuang in a daze and asked in confusion, but Master, why didn't you tell Yundong about these things for my own good? Ao Wushuang gently stroked Su Chan's hair and said with a smile, you'll know in the future. For now, it's better for you not to know. The only thing you know is that I will never hurt you. Su Chan stared at Ao Wushuang and saw that her eyes were full of pity and love. After all, she had been brought up by Ao Wushuang since she was a child. Her trust and dependence on her were almost instinctive. Although her heart was full of doubts, she still nodded slowly. But she still said worriedly, Master, you can't hurt Yundong. Ao Wushuang chuckled. Just as she was about to speak, she saw Li Yundong exhale and wake up slowly. The colorful light around him gradually condensed into a ball of golden light, enveloping his body, as if his whole body was plated with a layer of gold. Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, your golden lover has woken up. Seeing that Li Yundong had woken up, Su Chan immediately put all the questions in her mind to the back of her mind for the time being. She rushed over with a cheer and said with a smile, Yundong, you're awake. Li Yundong saw Su Chan, who was smiling sweetly, rushing toward him like a swallow flying into the forest. He caught the little girl and looked around in surprise. Then he said to Ao Wushuang, who was not far away, in even more surprise, Senior Ao Wushuang. Why are you here? Why am I here? Did you save us? Ao Wushuang smiled and said noncommittally, I didn't expect that you would get a blessing in disguise. You smashed the 3D Yuan Jindans and shared them with others. Although the efficacy of the medicine has decreased a little, it has created several Jinshin masters at the same time. What an anomaly. Li Yundong smiled and said with a sigh, I didn't expect it to be like this either. Fate makes fun of people. As he said this, Li Yundong couldn't help asking, Senior Ao Wushuang, did you also use heavenly thunder to drive Su Ling away? Ao Wushuang smiled and was about to speak when she saw that Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin next to her had also woken up one after another. Su Chan was overjoyed and said, Sister Zi Yuan and Sister Zhou Qin are both awake. Have they also reached the Jinshin phase? As she spoke, Chris, who was beside her, also let out a groan. A layer of white mist surrounded the top of her head, condensing and evaporating from the Baihui acupoint. Seeing that they had woken up one after another, Li Yundong put this question aside for the time being. He looked at Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin with concern, and then turned his eyes to Chris. Facing this blonde foreign girl who had always vowed to worship him as her master, Li Yundong suddenly felt very conflicted. Chris, who was in front of him, had obviously also inhaled the divine aura of elixir. Although the amount was not much, it had completely changed her physique. It was just like when he had been cleansed by the Rinyuan Jindan. If she could cultivate, she would be able to break through the Zhuji phase, Yang spirit phase, and even go straight to the Jinshan phase. Such a good seedling who was so eager to cultivate. Should he accept her as a disciple? Li Yundong fell into hesitation for a moment. I'm in a very bad state. I owe everyone one update. I'll make it up to you later. Chapter 585. After Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin woke up, they also looked around in surprise. They didn't understand why they had appeared in such a place. They went to see the net. But soon, they saw Ao Wushuang and roughly understood what had happened and how it had developed. Zi Yuan felt the changes in the Yuanine genuine qi in her body and said with emotion, I didn't expect that we would accidentally get the divine qi of elixir and break through to the Jinshan phase. It's really a good fortune. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, this is called good karma. Look at Zheng Yuan and Lingkong Shuangdao. They tried their best to snatch the Diyuan Jindan, but they were destined not to have a share. Zi Yuan thought of Zheng Yuan's method of harming others without benefiting himself. She shook her head and smiled. If Zheng Yuan knew that what he did had benefited us, I'm afraid he would die of anger. Li Yundong snorted and said, next time I see this old guy, I must deal with him on behalf of God. Zhou Qin suddenly said, I wonder how Alba is doing. Speaking of Alba, everyone in the room looked at Chris. At this time, Chris also woke up slowly and let out a long breath. This breath condensed and sprayed on the wall like a sharp arrow. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin looked at each other, and a thought came to their minds. Chris has also inhaled the divine qi of elixir. What about Alba? What should Li Yundong do? How should he deal with it? After Chris woke up, she slowly opened her eyes and looked around blankly. But what she saw was no longer the terrible killing and fighting on Tiandu Peak. She was in a traditional Chinese room, surrounded by antique furniture. If Chris hadn't found Li Yundong and the others standing beside her, she would have thought that she had been in her own room and that the trip to China was just a thrilling dream. But the truth was cruel and irreversible. Chris opened her mouth as if she had 1,000 words to say, but in the end, she just said blankly, Am I still alive? Zhou Qin, who had always been very sympathetic to Chris, said softly, Chris, you are still alive. Don't worry, you are safe now. Chris glanced at Zhou Qin, and her eyes involuntarily fell on the Vulcan's whip wrapped around her waist. Then, her eyes fell on Li Yunyang and Zi Yuan. She remembered the terrifying fighting and magical fighting she had seen on the Huangshan cableway on Tiandu Peak. This blonde, blue-eyed Pennsylvania student suddenly had an unrealistic feeling. Who are you? Are they aliens? Zhou Qin smiled and said, Chris, like you, we are all ordinary people. However, we are cultivators among ordinary people. In fact, Chris knew the answer, but in her opinion, cultivators should only have some special abilities. Even if it was the scene she had seen on the Huangshan cableway, she could accept it. However, the earth-shattering fighting scene she had seen on Tiandu Peak had far exceeded the limit of her imagination. In her opinion, a person like Li Yundong already had almost incredible power. He was completely a Superman, or even more than Superman. Is there really such a person on Earth? Chris looked at Zhou Qin in a daze, and after a while, she couldn't help looking at Li Yundong. Li Yundong sighed softly and said, Chris, now do you know why I can't easily accept you as my disciples? Chris opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue, but she was also a very smart person. She quickly figured out the key point. If such magic was passed on to an outsider like her, and she passed it on to her own people, what would happen? Chris was extremely unwilling, but she also lowered her head in resignation and murmured in English, "John, I'm sorry. I couldn't fulfill your last wish. Li Yundong, he won't teach me. Although I have Chinese blood, I am not a black-haired, yellow-skinned Chinese. Li Yundong is right. This kind of cultivation is a national weapon of China. He won't teach it to foreigners like us." In the past, when I read the history of China, I never understood why the great ancient Indian civilization, the equally great ancient Egyptian civilization, and even the ancient Babylonian civilization, which created the brilliant Hanging Garden, all declined without exception, even died out. Only the Chinese civilization, which has been passed down for 5,000 years, has never been cut off. Now, I think. I understand. My grandmother was right. There are hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China, and there are hidden masters everywhere. They may not show themselves at ordinary times, but when you get to know them in depth, you will know the vastness and greatness of this nation. Chris murmured softly as if she were talking in her sleep. At the end of her words, she couldn't help but think of the time when she, John, and Alba had come to China with great ambitions. They had been in high spirits and bickering with each other. But now, she was the only one who was safe. John had fallen off a cliff, and Alba had been kidnapped. No one knew whether she was alive or dead. All of this was like a terrible nightmare. Not only had she not been able to cultivate, but she had also not been able to fulfill John's last wish. Thinking of this, Chris couldn't help but feel sad. Tears flowed down her cheeks. As she cried, she said to Li Yundong, "Can you promise me one thing?" Li Yundong was born with a tender heart for women. Seeing Chris crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his heart softened and he said, "Tell me, what is it?" Chris cried, "John fell off a cliff and is probably dead. Alba came to China with us. If anything happens to her, I really can't explain it to her family. Can you promise me that you will find her? Bring her back safe and sound?" Li Yundong nodded slowly and firmly. "I promise you. But you have to promise me one thing." Chris wiped her tears and said with tears in her eyes, "What is it?" Li Yundong said, "You must not call the police. Moreover, you can't tell Alba's family anything about her or us." Chris was stunned and asked anxiously, "Why?" Li Yundong said seriously, "Jing Yuan is cruel and merciless, and Ding Nan is not easy to deal with. Since they kidnapped Alba, it means that they have a plan. If you call the police, the secular police will intervene. At that time, in order to protect themselves, they will definitely try to kill Alba and silence her. If we don't call the police, we can still find a way to get Alba back through our own strength. Do you understand? The more you push, the more dangerous Alba will be. The looser you push, the safer she will be." Chris thought for a moment and said helplessly and sadly, "Well, I think I understand." As she said this, she wiped the tears on her face, smiled bitterly, and said, "In that case, I'll leave first." Seeing that she was about to leave, Zhou Qin couldn't help asking, "Chris, aren't you going with us?" Chris looked at Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the cold and elegant Ao Wushuang. She clearly felt that she was out of place with them. She shook her head in disappointment and said desolately, "No, I have to go to Mount Huangshan again. Maybe I can find John's body. I have to take it back." Her words made the atmosphere in the room heavy and sad. Even Su Chan, who had rejected Chris, felt her heart soften for a moment. She looked at her leaving figure and felt sorry for her. Seeing her turn around and walk to the door, Li Yundong suddenly asked, "Chris, can you answer me? Why do you want to cultivate?" Chris suddenly stopped. She was lost in thought for a long time before she turned around and said with a bitter smile, "At first, I was just curious, especially when my grandmother told me that there were mysterious people in the distant and mysterious China who had the art of immortality. At that time, I was very curious. Was there really a way to live forever in this world? With this suspicion in mind, I returned to this land, but what happened next changed my opinion. I no longer want to cultivate for the sake of immortality. I'm just curious about where this power comes from. Why are people so strong? Chris said softly, the one who wants to cultivate the most is John. His desire for power is strong, and he wants to know the answer to all this more urgently than I do. But now that he is gone, his will has fallen on my shoulders. I have the obligation and responsibility to figure it out for him. What is cultivation? This is for myself, but also for him. Chris's words made everyone in the room fall into silence with different expressions. Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Ao Wushuang were born cultivators. They were born in the cultivation world and took all this for granted. Li Yundong and Zhou Qin deeply resonated with Chris's words. At the beginning, they were also like Chris, full of strong curiosity about the power of cultivation. In order to understand it, they would do anything. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Chris. He nodded slowly and said, "In that case, you can stay with me for the time being. I will slowly explain to you what cultivation is. It can be regarded as a little compensation for John." Chris was stunned, and then her eyes widened, as if she had been saved from a desperate situation. In despair, she suddenly saw the dawn of hope. She said in a trembling voice, You agree to accept me as a disciple?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and shook his head. "No, I just promise you that I will slowly tell you what cultivation is all about. But I can't accept you as a disciple for the time being. You can hang your name in my sect first. You can be regarded as a registered disciple, not an official disciple." Chris was familiar with China. She knew that there was only a thin line between a registered disciple and an official disciple. Since Li Yundong had agreed today, as long as she worked hard to cultivate with him in the future, she would be able to achieve her wish one day. Chris was overjoyed. She was about to kneel down and kowtow, but Li Yundong quickly stopped her in mid-air and held her body a few meters away. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry. If God really wants you to be my disciple, this kowtow can be done later." When Chris saw that Li Yundong's hand had stopped her from kneeling, she was in awe and admiration. She lowered her head and said, "Okay, Master." Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, "Don't call me Master. You can call me Li Yundong." Chris thought for a moment and shouted, "Then I'll call you Master Li, okay?" Li Yundong saw that she was stubborn, but this was a compromise, so he nodded with a smile. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he saw Su Chan gently tugging at the corner of his clothes and winking at him. Li Yundong knew that Su Chan had something to say to him, so he walked with her to another room. As soon as they entered, Su Chan said anxiously in a low voice, "Yundong, how can you accept an outsider as a disciple? Aren't you afraid that the cultivation method will be leaked?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Silly girl, didn't you see that Chris has already inhaled the divine aura of elixir? If I don't accept her as a disciple today, what if other sects see her in the future? If they accept her as a disciple and it happens to be against us, what should we do?" Su Chan was stunned, but then she snorted and said, "Are we afraid of a barbarian?" Li Yundong shook his head and couldn't help laughing. "You can't say that. Now our Fox Zen school has enemies on all sides. If a hostile sect sees that she has outstanding talent and accepts her as a disciple, not only will there be the danger of the secret cultivation method being leaked, but we will also set up a strong enemy for ourselves. Although her strength is weak now, Westerners are born with abundant qi and blood. She is a good candidate for cultivation. With the transformation of the divine aura of elixir, her cultivation speed will definitely be very amazing." But Su Chan was still a little unconvinced, but she had to admit that Li Yundong's words made sense. She wanted to object, but she couldn't find a reason at the moment. Li Yundong said with a smile, "No buts. Instead of letting others control her fate, it's better for us to control this uncertain factor ourselves." Only then did Su Chan stop talking. She smiled and said, "Well, what you said makes sense." Li Yundong and Su Chan looked at each other and smiled, then walked out hand in hand. I'm going to be very busy recently. As for what exactly I'm busy with, Because of some confidential reasons, it's a little inconvenient for me to say, but I believe that everyone will know after a while if nothing unexpected happens. There are 2 updates today and 1 more in the evening. It's estimated that I still have to continue to miss 1 update. I'll try my best to make it up tomorrow. Tang tang, I bow to everyone. I'm sorry. Chapter 586. When Li Yundong took Chris and the others back home in Tiannan City, it was already the next morning. The little foxes, who had just gotten up, had no idea that something that could change the whole situation of the cultivation world had happened last night. Watch net. 7 KOM. When they saw Li Yundong come back with Chris, they all looked at her curiously and whispered to each other. After Li Yundong gave Chris a few instructions, Chris returned to the room that Li Yundong had arranged for her. Zi Yuan winked at Li Yundong. After Li Yundong and Zi Yuan entered their room, Zi Yuan whispered, Li Yundong, do you feel strange? Li Yundong smiled and said, what's strange? Zi Yuan said, who on earth struck that heavenly thunder? It's not you, it's not me. Could it be Ao Wushuang? Only a master of thunder retribution can control such a powerful heavenly thunder. Is Ao Wushuang an 8-tailed fox? Li Yundong's face darkened slightly. He said, I also thought of this, but when I asked Ao Wushuang, she avoided talking about it. I feel like she's hiding something from me. Zi Yuan frowned slightly. What could she be hiding from us? Since you want to save us, why are you hiding? After a while, he suddenly raised his head and said in a low voice, could it be Lu Yi? Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes lit up and she exclaimed in a low voice, it's very possible. But she quickly frowned and said, but why won't he show up? Is he plotting something? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, don't worry about him. Any conspiracy in this world is based on strength. As long as we are strong enough, it doesn't matter how many schemes we have. Was Yen Feng's means powerful enough? But why did he fail again and again? It was all because he wasn't strong enough. Now that we are lucky enough to obtain the divine aura of elixir and have broken through to the golden body realm, we should strike while the iron is hot and further achieve a breakthrough in our cultivation. The inauguration ceremony of the head of the Linggong sect will be held in a while. At that time, spring would arrive. Once spring arrives, it will be the best time to undergo the lightning tribulation. Seeing that he still remembered the affairs of his sect at this time, Zi Yuan felt warm in her heart. She smiled slightly and said, the affairs of our Linggong sect are just a trivial matter. The most important thing now is that you must be on guard against the provocations and challenges of other sects that may come at any time. I believe that before long, everyone in the cultivation world will know that we have obtained the Diyuan Jindan. At that time, although the cultivators in the world may not immediately come to kill us, there will definitely be a lot of jealousy and hatred. Li Yundong chuckled and said, the divine chi of elixir has long been melted into the bloodline. They can't snatch it even if they want to. The only thing I'm worried about is a few things. The first is the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. I don't know who has it. Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said, the Medicine King tripod is the supreme magical weapon of our Taoist alchemy. With it, even if you can't refine Renyuan Jindan or Diyuan Jindan, it will still be a very good furnace for refining other elixirs. The success rate and production rate will be many times higher than that of ordinary pill tripods. It would be great if we could find the Medicine King tripod first. Li Yundong pondered for a moment and then said, you're right. The second thing is that I want to cultivate in seclusion immediately and maximize the efficacy of the elixir, but I'm very worried that John and Alba's families will come to China, which will cause a lot of trouble. Therefore, I haven't decided for the time being whether I should go to Mount Wuhua to snatch Alba back and get rid of Jing Yuan, the big devil, or go into seclusion for the time being and digest the elixir first. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, the Diyuan Jindan only appears once in 500 years. It's a rare opportunity. You'd better go into seclusion first. If there's anything else, leave it to others to deal with. Li Yundong said with some embarrassment, but Chris wants to go to Mount Huangshan to find John. She can't do it without someone accompanying her. Are you going with her? You've all absorbed the divine qi of elixir. Wouldn't it be a waste if you don't go into seclusion? Zi Yuan also frowned in embarrassment. She thought for a while, then smiled and said, I have an idea. Go find your classmate Feng Na and ask her to accompany Chris. With a secular person by her side, even if a cultivator wants to do something to her, he will be afraid. It's best to ask her to find a few more people. The more people there are, the safer Chris will be. Li Yundong laughed and said, That's a good idea. Let's do that. Li Yundong quickly went out, picked up his mobile phone, and dialed Feng Na's number. After the phone was connected, Feng Na said in surprise, Oh my God, this is the first time you've taken the initiative to call me. Did the sun rise from the west? Dragon God hero, what's the matter? Li Yundong laughed and said, Can't I call you if I have nothing to do? Feng Na smiled and said, Come on, you don't come to the temple for nothing. Tell me, what's the matter? Li Yundong smiled and told her about Chris's situation. Then he asked, If it's convenient for you, can you accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan to find John's whereabouts? When Feng Na heard about John falling off the cliff, she was shocked. What? John fell off the cliff? What happened? Li Yundong said with some embarrassment, If you can help, Chris will tell you the details when you see her. I'll pay for your travel expenses. If you can't, then forget it. It doesn't matter. Feng Na sighed and said, Don't say that. Chris and I are friends. Of course, I should help her with this little favor. Not to mention the travel expenses. Do I look like someone who is short of money? Speaking of this, Feng Na's heart skipped a beat and she said tentatively, If you really want to thank me, why don't you invite me to work in your shop? It can also solve my re-employment problem. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Your re-employment problem? You lost your job. Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, I'm going to graduate soon. Won't I still be unemployed? Li Yundong thought for a moment and thought to himself, Feng Na is warm, kind, and meticulous. She is suitable to be a manager. In the future, I'll leave this shop to Chana and let her be the owner and manage the money. Feng Na will be the shopkeeper and be in charge of the specific operations. Thinking of this, Li Yundong smiled and said, Well, it just so happens that I need a manager in my shop. It couldn't be better if you came. Feng Na was overjoyed and cheered, but she soon said with a smile, Can you bring an assistant? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Is it Ching Cheng? All right, bring it over. But she's the only one. I don't have a place to arrange for more. Feng Na giggled and said, Yes, from today on, you are my boss. Boss, you can't bully us good people. Feng Na giggled and hung up the phone. As soon as she put down the phone, Ching Cheng, who was standing beside her, leaned over and said with an ambiguous look on her face, Oh, not bad. You've finally found a rich man? Feng Na's eyes lit up. Feng Na nudged her soft waist with her elbow and said with a smile, What do you think? I'm a good friend, right? I didn't forget to take you with me even when I found a rich man. Ching Cheng laughed and said, Nana, you are really capable. But why is Li Yundong looking for you? I've known him for a while, but I've never seen him take the initiative to call someone. The smile on Feng Na's face suddenly disappeared. She sighed and said, Chris, John, and Alba had an accident when they went to Mount Huangshan. John fell off a cliff and asked us to accompany Chris to help find them. Ching Cheng was shocked and covered her mouth. No way. Why didn't you call the police? Let the police and the locals help you find them. Feng Na also showed a puzzled expression. I don't know. Li Yundong said not to call the police. Maybe he was afraid of getting into trouble. Ching Cheng thought for a moment and said, Then when are we going? Feng Na stood up and began to tidy up the things on the desk. Now. Ching was stunned. Now? You have a student council meeting to host this afternoon. Feng Na sneered. Screw the student council. What's the point of being in this lousy student council if you found a new home? As she said this, she reached out her hand and lifted Ching's chin with a frivolous expression. She giggled and said, Girl, from now on, you will follow me and live a good life. After saying that, she couldn't help but burst into laughter with Ching. The two of them laughed and joked around in the classroom for a while. Noticing that everyone was looking at them strangely, Feng Na's expression changed. Be serious, she said in a low voice. Although we just heard good news, John falling off the cliff is not good news. If Li Yundong finds out that we are laughing like this, he will think that we are cold-blooded and heartless. Ching rolled her eyes at Feng Na. Isn't it all because of you? I think you're the one who can't control yourself. Feng Na was about to refute, but she suddenly saw Yanhua walking in the corridor outside the classroom. She thought to herself, I can't host this afternoon's student council meeting, so I might as well let Yanhua do it. Although he is a little narrow-minded, he is still talented. Feng Na immediately rushed into the corridor and shouted at Yanhua, Yanhua. But at this time, Yanhua was no longer the Yanhua of the past. He kept his head down all the way, as if he would walk in the shadows at any time. At this time, Yanfeng had not fully adapted to her new identity. After all, seizing the body of her nephew was completely different from seizing the body of others. Moreover, the pure Yuanyang qi in Yanhua's body had been unable to integrate with her own Yuanyin qi, which made her fight against this qi almost all the time. Therefore, Yanfeng turned a deaf ear to Feng Na's shouts for a moment. Seeing Yanhua walking away with his head down, Feng Na couldn't help but shout again, Hey, Yanhua, she's calling you. At this time, Yanhua suddenly understood. He turned his face, looked at Feng Na with a strange expression, and asked, What's the matter? Seeing Yanhua's distant expression, Feng Na was suddenly displeased and thought to herself, You're giving me a cold shoulder? Humph, I won't let you off easy. Feng Na's face also became serious and she said, It's nothing. I just wanted to say hello. At this time, Yanfeng suddenly came to her senses and realized that her attitude was very abnormal. He immediately smiled very warmly and said, Sorry, I was thinking about something just now. What's the matter, senior sister? As the saying goes, don't hit a smiling person. When Feng Na saw Yanhua smiling apologetically, the anger in her heart immediately dissipated. Feng Na said with a smile, Can you help me host this afternoon's meeting? Yanfeng was stunned. The afternoon meeting? Feng Na smiled and said, Yes, Li Yundong asked me to do him a favor, so I can't go. You can help me host it. As soon as Yanfeng heard the three words, Li Yundong, she immediately became vigilant. All the hair on her body almost stretched out like a radar. He asked, Li Yundong. What did he want to see you for? Feng Na sighed and said, Alas, you will know this sooner or later. Do you still remember Chris, John, and Alba, who joined our school's student union a few days ago? The three of them went to Mount Huangshan yesterday, but John fell off the cliff. Chris wants to find his whereabouts, but Li Yundong can't get away by himself, so he asked me to accompany him. Yanfeng's expression didn't change at all, but in her heart, a storm was suddenly set off. It could be said that the Battle of Tiandu Peak of Mount Huangshan had spread throughout the cultivation world overnight. Although Yanfeng had been hiding it, he was not isolated. Naturally, he also knew the news. Especially when he heard that Li Yundong had asked Feng Na to accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan, he immediately had an idea and said with a smile, You want to accompany Chris to Mount Huangshan? Can I go too? Feng Na was stunned. You? You will go? What about the afternoon meeting? Yanfeng smiled and said, I'm not the only vice president. Let the others go. Feng Na knew that Yan Hua and Li Yundong usually had a lot of dirty dealings, and at this time, he was so eager to volunteer. For a moment, she muttered in her heart. Seeing this, Yan Feng immediately smiled and said, "Sister, John is an exchange student of our school. If something happens to him, it's only right for me to help. Besides, you are all girls. If there is any safety problem and you meet some bad people, what should you do? I am a boy after all, and I can protect you. Even if you don't meet bad people, when the time comes, you will definitely have to ask the local people for help. It's not convenient for you to do some things, but it's convenient for me. What do you think?" Feng Na was shaken by Yan Feng's words. She thought for a moment and smiled. "You are really eloquent. What you said makes sense. Well, let's go together." Yan Feng was overjoyed and said with a smile, "When are we going?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Now. I'll go back and pack my things. See you at the school gate." Yan Feng watched Feng Na turn around and enter the classroom, walking in the direction of the student dormitory with Ching Cheng. The smile on his face became gloomy little by little, and a meaningful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Chapter 587. After the tragic battle of Tiandu Peak, although the heaven's retribution caused by Su Ling did not descend, it began to rain heavily the next day. The entire Mount Huangshan was shrouded in raindrops the size of beans. The sky was dark, as if covered with a pot lid. From time to time, bolts of lightning would jump out of the thick dark clouds, as if they were warning the world. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. On the path of Mount Huangshan, Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school raised her head. Her eyes were full of awe and yearning for the lightning in the sky. Zhou Ping, who was following closely behind her, saw her stop and couldn't help asking, "Master, what's wrong?" Zhang Ling sighed and said, "Spring is coming, and it's time to go through the thunder retribution again." Zhou Ping held a bamboo umbrella and asked in confusion, "Master, why are you suddenly so emotional?" Zhang Ling shook her head slightly. "The Battle of Tiandu Peak happened so suddenly that even we didn't get the news. Unexpectedly, after this battle, Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and that little fox spirit enjoyed 3 Dun Jindan alone. Alas. Good luck. The Jinshan phase is the biggest bottleneck for cultivators. As long as they can break through this bottleneck, the thunder retribution is only a matter of time. After passing the thunder retribution, they can directly cultivate to the 9th heaven." Zhang Ling let out a long sigh and said in a lonely and bitter tone, "I have cultivated for decades, but I have never been able to break through to the Jinshan phase. Li Yundong has only cultivated for more than half a year, but he has already broken through to the Jinshan phase. This spring is the best time to go through the thunder retribution. At that time, I wonder how many people in the cultivation world will challenge the power of heaven and go through the thunder retribution. Will Li Yundong be among them?" Although Zhou Ping had a grudge against Li Yundong, thinking of Li Yundong's rapid progress in cultivation, Zhou Ping was also secretly afraid. She said softly, "Master, even if he has cultivated to the Jinshan phase, he can't go through the thunder retribution so quickly. Even the sect master had to endure for nearly 10 years. Zhang Ling shook her head. "That's not necessarily true. This guy's luck is too good, so good that it's amazing." As she spoke, Zhang Ling turned her head and looked at Zhou Ping with bright eyes. She said in a deep voice, "Do you know why I brought you here?" Zhou Ping shook her head. "I don't know. I was wondering why you came here when the fight was over." Zhang Ling smiled and said, "I'm not the only one. In fact, many sects have sent people down secretly. They are searching all over the mountains and plains." Zhou Ping was stunned, but she soon understood. "The Medicine King tripod?" Zhang Ling nodded. "That's right. When Wan Zhenyuan left, he only took 1 Dun Jindan with him. He didn't even have time to take the Medicine King tripod with him. After the Battle of Tiandu Peak, the Medicine King tripod disappeared, and I haven't heard that other cultivators have taken it away. If no one has gotten it, I believe it is near Mount Huangshan. If we are lucky, we may be able to find it. Zhou Ping was happy at first, but then she said with some frustration, so what if we find it? Can he refine another Diyuan Jin Dan? Zhang Ling sneered, you pig head. It's not important whether we can refine it or not. What's important is to make sure that no one else can refine it, understand? Zhou Ping suddenly understood and said, so that's how it is. Master, you are so powerful. You are farsighted and scheming. Zhang Ling snorted. Don't flatter me. Besides, if Wang Jinyuan can refine Diyuan Jin Dan, why can't we? What the Gazao sect can do, why can't our Zhengyi school? Although the Gazao sect is second to none among the external alchemy sects, our Zhengyi school also has many experts who are good at refining elixirs. My shitty Zhang Kongyun is one of them. Zhou Ping thought of Zhang Kongyun's sloppy appearance as a vegetable farmer and couldn't help frowning. Him? Is he a master of alchemy? Zhang Ling laughed and said, you can't tell, can you? I've told you many times not to judge a book by its cover. There are many things he's good at. As the two of them talked, they searched around with sharp eyes. Suddenly, Zhou Ping's eyes swept over and saw a vague figure on a cliff. Zhou Ping pointed and said in surprise, Master, look, there's someone. Zhang Ling looked over and saw a figure hanging on a pine tree on the cliff. She turned her head and said to Zhou Ping, go and see what's going on. Zhou Ping nodded. In an instant, her yang spirit went out of her body and wandered around the man. Then, she quickly returned to her body and said, Master, it's a foreigner. He seems to have fallen off a cliff and is unconscious now. Should we save him? Zhang Ling was stunned. A foreigner? Maybe he's a foreign tourist who has lost his footing. Let's save him and see if he's still alive. Zhou Ping responded and flew out again. When she flew back, the yang spirit was carrying a burly man with blonde hair and blue eyes. It was Hardadef, who had fallen off the cliff. Zhang Ling bent down and checked his pulse on his neck. She smiled and said, he's not dead yet. He's really lucky. Zhou Ping's yang spirit returned to her body. She also checked Hardadef's pulse, but she frowned and said, but Master, he's almost out of breath. What should we do? Should we use our luck to save him? Zhang Ling thought for a moment, sighed slightly, and said, there's no need for luck. Mount Huangshan is not Mount Longhu, and this is not the territory of our Zhengyi school. The Buddhists and other Taoist sects are very powerful here. It's not appropriate for us to waste our Zhenqi. Let's use the resurrection pill to save him. Zhou Ping was slightly shocked. Master, using the resurrection pill to save a foreigner? This is too wasteful, isn't it? Zhang Ling shook her head, saluted with one hand, and said, you can't say that. As the saying goes, God has the virtue of cherishing life. It's rare that he didn't die after falling off the cliff. This is God's will, and it can't be violated. You are also a cultivator. Have you done all your homework in vain? Although Zhou Ping was a little reluctant, she still took out a small purple-blue porcelain bottle from her bosom and poured out a golden thumb-sized pill from it. She pinched Hardadef's cheeks and stuffed the pill into his mouth while muttering, you're lucky. This is a life-saving elixir that is hard to find even with 1,000 pieces of gold. You can actually eat one. Humph. I haven't even tasted it before. Zhang Ling couldn't help laughing. Do you want to try it? It's simple. You can also jump down from the mountain and have a taste. Zhou Ping stood up and said with a smile, Master, I was just saying. I just feel that it's a pity to use such a good elixir to save a foreigner. Zhang Ling didn't comment. She stared at Hardadef with bright eyes, only to see that his pale face was gradually becoming a little rosy. Suddenly, she felt that Hardadef's face was a little familiar, so she said to Zhou Ping, push his hair aside and take a look. At this time, it was raining heavily, and Hardadef had fallen from the cliff. His hair was very messy, and even his forehead and eyes were covered. After Zhou Ping pushed his hair aside, she was also surprised and said, "Master, he looks so familiar." Then, Zhou Ping suddenly said, "Ah, I remember. I seem to have seen him at the Taoist assembly. This guy chased after Li Yundong to become his disciple, right?" Zhang Ling suddenly sneered. "Li Yundong again. Humph. If I had known, I wouldn't have saved him." Zhou Ping immediately said, "Master, why don't I push him down again?" Zhang Ling immediately glared at her and said, "Are you crazy? How can you say such a thing? Let's go. It's his fate to be saved. I just hope that he won't follow Li Yundong and go against us in the future." After that, she flicked her sleeves and left unhappily. Seeing her leave, Zhou Ping looked back at Hardadef unwillingly and shouted, "Master, wait for me." Then, she chased after him. The two of them walked along the path, and as soon as they stepped onto the ropeway, they saw a few people walking towards them. The woman in the lead was blonde, tall, and beautiful. She was also an extremely beautiful Western woman. Behind her stood a round-faced beauty and a big-breasted beauty. Behind the two beauties stood a rather handsome boy. They were none other than Chris, Feng Na, Ching Cheng, and Yen Feng. Behind them were a few locals who kept pointing at them. Feng Na was holding a small umbrella and looking around carefully. She saw Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping coming from the opposite side of the ropeway. As soon as she opened her mouth, she asked loudly, "Hello, have you seen a foreigner with blonde hair and blue eyes?" As she said this, she handed over a photo of Hardadef that she had prepared. Zhang Ling had inadvertently saved Hardadef, who was related to Li Yundong. She was unhappy. When she saw that the photo in Feng Na's hand was of Hardadef, she immediately sneered and said angrily, "I've never seen him before." As she spoke, she swept past them with Zhou Ping. Feng Na looked at their backs with her mouth agape and was speechless for a moment. She muttered in a low voice, "If you haven't seen him, then so be it. Why are you so angry?" Ching Ching whispered, "Well, Nana, don't argue with them. Let's look around again. It should be this area, right? Chris?" Chris was looking around anxiously. When she heard Ching Chang's words, she nodded and said, "Hardadef fell around here, but we just looked for him at the foot of the mountain, but we didn't see him. We don't know whether he is alive or dead. It's really worrying." Feng Na comforted her. "Chris, the residents nearby also said that there are many trees here. It's possible that he was caught by that tree. Hardadef is a lucky man. He should be fine." While she was speaking, she saw Yen Feng turn her head and stare at Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling, who were leaving. There was a faint sneer at the corner of her mouth. Feng Na asked curiously, "Yen Hua, what are you looking at?" Yen Feng turned her face to hide her gaffe. He smiled and said, "Nothing. I just think they are a little strange. Why did they come to Mount Huangshan on such a rainy day?" Feng Na smiled and said, "What's so strange about that? What are you doing in Mount Huangshan? Don't look around. Look carefully." Yen Feng smiled slightly and stopped talking. Finally, she quickly glanced in the direction of Zhang Ling's departure and thought to herself, "Humph, they are all looking for the Medicine King tripod. I wonder if they have found it." Chris and the others searched along the ropeway, but found nothing. Feng Na stood on the path halfway up the mountain in a daze and said, "It's not a good way to go on like this. Maybe we should spread out and look around? Then give a shout, and perhaps John will hear us if he is awake." Chris smiled bitterly and said, "This is the only way. I will look along the east side, and you can look in other directions." Feng Na nodded. She turned to Yen Feng and said, "Yen Hua, where are you going to look?" Yen Feng had no intention of looking for people with them at all. The reason why he came to Mount Huangshan with Feng Na was that he wanted to spy on the situation here after the Battle of Tiandu Peak, especially to find the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. Secondly, Yen Fong had learned through his own channels that Chris had also obtained the divine chi of elixir and wanted to find an opportunity to change his body. Since Yen Fong had occupied his nephew's body, although he had changed from a 5-leak body to a 7-treasure body, his strength had not increased but decreased. Especially when he was cultivating, there would always be a strong sense of guilt in his heart. Moreover, the Yuanyang Qi in Yen Hua's body in his own Yuanyin Qi would always cause a violent conflict, which would cause his cultivation to regress. Yen Fong smiled and said to Fong Na, "Chris is unfamiliar with this place. I'm afraid she will be in danger. I'd better stay with her." Fong Na thought for a moment and said with a smile, "Well, let's split up first and meet here in an hour." They discussed for a while and then dispersed. Chris didn't know that she had been stared at by Yen Fong. On the contrary, she smiled gratefully at Yen Fong and said, "Thank you very much. You are really a gentleman." Yen Fong put on a fake smile and said meaningfully, "You don't have to thank me. I'm not a gentleman." Chris knew that Chinese people were modest. She thought that this was Yen Fong's modesty. She smiled politely at Yen Fong and said, "Where should we start looking?" Yen Fong intended to guide Chris to a place where there were few people. He pointed casually and said, "Let's go there." Seeing that Yen Fong was pointing to a mountain path, Chris hesitated for a moment, but she quickly nodded and said, "Okay, let's go there." Then she walked forward. Yen Fong walked behind Chris, staring at her like a hunter watching his prey walk into a trap. There was a faint sneer at the corner of his mouth. The two of them walked for a while. Yen Fong saw that there were lush green pines and trees all around. There was no trace of people around. It was obviously a good place to kill people. He sneered in his heart. Just as he was about to step forward and make a move, he suddenly heard Chris cry out in alarm. Then, she ran forward like crazy and shouted, "John, is that you? John! Sorry, it's late. There will be another chapter in a while." Yen Fong's low roar echoed in the jungle like a devil's howl. Her eyes were shining with a fierce light, but suddenly she saw Hardadef's eyelids tremble slightly. The blonde and blue-eyed foreigner struggled to open his eyes and said, "My master, he is a good person." This sentence was ordinary, but in Yen Fong's ears, it was no less than a thunderbolt striking him. Yen Fong was so frightened that she suddenly stood up and took 2 steps back. She looked at Hardadef in shock and stammered, You're awake. What did you hear? You heard it all?" Hardadef struggled to open his eyes and said intermittently, "I heard what you said. You misunderstood my master, he." Yen Fong didn't hear a single word of Hardadef's next words clearly. For a moment, his mind was buzzing, and fear and panic drowned his soul. Yen Fong had never thought that her cultivation would have regressed to the point that she couldn't even detect whether the person in front of her was awake or not. But what was even more frightening was that Hardadef had actually heard her words. This meant that her identity had been exposed. Although she could change her body again, how could it be so easy? Whose body could she take? Chris? What if she came back and Hardadef told her what she had just said? Take Hardadef's body? This foreigner's yang qi was even stronger than Yen Hua's. Moreover, even if she took Hardadef's body, what about Yen Hua's body? Where could she hide it? How could she explain his whereabouts? Could she adapt to this foreigner's words, deeds and habits? At least she knew Yen Hua, but what about this foreigner? For a moment, the expression on Yen Fong's face kept changing. She went from panic to panic, from panic to fear, from fear to anger, and from anger to murderous intent. Why did Li Yundong's cultivation advance by leaps and bounds and become stronger and stronger, while she always had to run around like a stray dog? Her cultivation was getting weaker and weaker. Why? The more Yen Fong thought about it, the more evil thoughts grew in her heart. She stared at Hardadef viciously and thought to herself, it would be great if this guy died. Although Hardadef was seriously injured at this time, his survival instinct was still there. The threat and premonition of death still existed in his natural instinct. Seeing that the murderous intent in Yen Fang's eyes was getting stronger and stronger, he was suddenly shocked and subconsciously wanted to turn around and run away. But at this time, Yen Fang suddenly laughed grimly, stepped forward quickly, and slapped Hardadef's head. Hardadef was also a martial arts practitioner for many years. Although he was seriously injured, at this critical moment of life and death, all his potential was stimulated. He subconsciously tilted his body and dodged the fatal blow. His shoulder was suddenly hit by Yen Fang's palm, and his body flew out like a kite with a broken string. Soon, he rolled down the steep hillside. Yen Fang stared at Hardadef, who was constantly rolling down the mountain. He sneered and said grimly, "After being hit by my palm, all the bones in your body will be broken within 2 hours, let alone rolling down such a high mountain. If you don't die this time, it will be intolerable." Yen Fang looked in the direction where Hardadef had rolled down the cliff again. After a long time, he turned around and rearranged the scene, causing Hardadef to slip and fall. He himself dodged to the side and quietly waited for Chris, Fong Na, and the others to come back. But what Yen Fang didn't know was that when Hardadef rolled down the steep hillside, he was lucky that his head didn't hit the rocks on the mountain. When he rolled to the foot of the mountain and stopped, he heard a clear girl's voice. "Oh, someone has fallen, master." When Hardadef heard this voice, he only had time to shout for help with the last bit of strength in his body before he immediately fainted. At this time, a pretty little girl walked over to the unconscious Hardadef. This girl was none other than Zhang Lufang, the youngest shimi of the Jingyi school, who had followed Zhou Ping to participate in the Taoist assembly. Zhang Lufang walked over to Hardadef curiously and saw that the foreigner's face was swollen and bruised. She squatted down to check Hardadef's pulse, then turned to an old man dressed as a farmer behind her and said, "Master, it's a foreigner. It seems that he's still breathing. Hey. He smells of the resurrection pill of our Jingyi school. It's so strange. Who gave it to him?" Zhang Kongyun walked over unhurriedly with a cane. He narrowed his eyes and glanced at Hardadef, then sighed and said, "If I'm right, it should be eldest Chiji Zhongling who saved him." "Is eldest Shibwa here too?" Zhang Lufang asked curiously with her eyes wide open. Zhang Kongyun stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Of course. Even I am looking for the Medicine King tripod. How can she not look for it?" Zhang Lufang blinked a few times, pointed to Hardadef at her feet, and said, "Master, should we save him?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "Alas, eldest Chiji even gave him the resurrection pill. Obviously, he was seriously injured before he fell off the cliff. Now he's even more injured. Hey, he seems to have been hit by a palm. Let me see." Zhang Kongyun bent down and checked Hardadef's pulse. He immediately frowned and said, "This aura. It seems to be the Xianmen Qi of our Jingyi school. It can't be. Could it be eldest Chiji?" Zhang Lufang was also tongue-tied and said, "Could it be that eldest Shibwa accidentally hurt him? And then she gave him the resurrection pill?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "Impossible. Eldest Chiji is proud and conceited. Although she is a little hot-tempered, protective and stubborn, she is not a bad person. She would not do such a heartless thing." Zhang Lufang looked at Hardadef sympathetically and said, "This man is so miserable. He actually fell off the cliff twice. And he didn't die twice. Master, can you save him?" Zhang Kongyun scratched his beard in embarrassment. He frowned and said, "This man has already taken the resurrection pill of morality before. Obviously, he has already been injured. Now he is seriously injured by the palm force and the fall from the cliff. His injuries are getting worse and worse. Even God can't save him." Zhang Lufang was greatly disappointed. "Ah. Master, even you can't save him?" Zhang Kongyun thought for a moment and said, "I can only give it a try, but the result depends on his own luck." Zhang Lufang smiled and said, "Master, just give it a try. Anyway, no one will know that you did it if you fail. Zhang Kongyun glared at her and pretended to be angry. B****, don't jinx it. As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeves, took out a golden needle from his cuff, and quickly pierced it into the Baihui acupoint on the top of Hardadef's head. Zhang Kongyun's movements were fast and steady. With a pinch of his fingers, the 3-inch-long golden needle was completely inserted, leaving only a little bit of the end. Zhang Liufang's eyes widened and she looked at Zhang Kongyun nervously. She saw her master shake the golden needle with his fingers and then quickly pull it out. Before long, Hardadef's eyelids trembled slightly and he opened his eyes. Well, I promised to make up for the next chapter, but I was urged to sleep by the leader. I can only upload the second chapter for today and finish the rest of the chapters tomorrow. I'll upload them as soon as possible, so that I can be relieved. Chapter 589. Seeing that Hardadef had woken up, Zhang Lufang clapped her hands and said with a smile, "You're awake, you're awake. Master, you're really amazing." Zhang Kongyun proudly put away the golden needles, stroked his beard, and said with a smile, "Of course." Zhang Lufang squatted down and shouted at John, "Hey, big nose. How did you get hurt? Who hurt you?" But Hardadef looked at her with a confused face. After a while, he suddenly smiled and stammered, "Master, master." Zhang Lufang was shocked. She reached out and patted Hardadef's face, saying, "Hey, wake up. I'm not your master." Hardadef was still smiling foolishly. Master is a good person." Zhang Lufang turned her head and looked at Zhang Kongyun helplessly. "Master. Did you make him an idiot?" Zhang Kongyun's face was full of embarrassment. He glared at Zhang Lufang angrily and stammered, "Nonsense. How could I possibly make him an idiot? Is my golden needle crossing calamity skill just for show?" Zhang Lufang said suspiciously, "Oh? Then how did he become like this?" Seeing that his disciple was doubting his authority, Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he blew his beard and glared at him. He said, "It must be because this guy's qi is in disorder, which caused his upper dantian to be in disorder. That's why he lost his mind and became a fool." Zhang Lufang looked helplessly at Hardadef, who kept giggling, and sighed, "Master, what should we do? Leave him here?" Zhang Kongyun sighed and said, "Forget it, take him back. I'll go back and mix some medicine for him to see if it can cure him. Watch net." Zhang Lufang blinked her eyes and said with a smile, Okay, someone can play with me now, although, this guy is a bit silly. However, it's still better than some old man who grows vegetables all day long." Zhang Kongyun rolled his eyes, flicked his sleeves, and said, "Then you are responsible for carrying him, I don't care." After saying that, he swaggered away. Zhang Lufang hurriedly shouted a few times, but she saw that Zhang Kongyun had walked far away in the blink of an eye without looking back. She stamped her feet angrily and said angrily, "You're so annoying. How can you let a little girl like me carry such a big man on her back? Bah, he stinks." Zhang Lufang pinched her nose and chased after Zhang Kongyun with the giggling Hardadef on her back. The two of them soon walked out of the scenic area. When they were about to leave, Zhang Kongyun suddenly saw a group of villagers at the foot of the mountain surrounding an arrogant villager with saliva flying everywhere. They were discussing something loudly, and the villager who was surrounded in the middle was waving a purple gold object high in his hand. Zhang Kongyun took a closer look and was shocked. He thought, "Is this the Medicine King tripod?" Zhang Kongyun immediately stepped forward and took a look outside the crowd. Sure enough, he saw that everyone was looking at the purple tripod in the villager's hand with admiring eyes. This tripod was exuding a strange fragrance and was exquisitely carved. What was more amazing was that it was surrounded by a layer of white mist, as if it were an immortal item. If this wasn't the Medicine King tripod, then what was it? Zhang Kongyun was shocked. He immediately squeezed in and said, "Old fellow, your medicine." Ah, are you selling this tripod? The villager immediately looked at him warily and snorted. Of course I'm selling it. Why not? Zhang Kongyun was overjoyed. How much? I'll buy it. The villager laughed and said, that's hard to say. Just now, Wang Er, who lives next door, suggested that I take it to the auction house and sell it to the highest bidder. Zhang Kongyun was shocked. You want to auction the medicine, this tripod? The villager said proudly, of course. This thing is a treasure at first glance. It will definitely fetch a good price. Zhang Kongyun tentatively asked, I'll pay 200,000 yuan to buy this thing in your hand now. Will you sell it? The villager snorted and hugged the Medicine King tripod tightly. He sneered and said, someone just bought it for 500,000 yuan. I didn't sell it, and you still want to pay 200,000 yuan? Zhang Kongyun frowned and thought, someone has already taken action? Zhang Kongyun quickly raised 2 fingers and said, then I'll pay 2 million yuan to buy it now. Will you sell it? As soon as he said this, there was an uproar around. 2 million yuan was not a small number. The villager was stunned. 2 million yuan. His eyes suddenly showed a strong desire, but he quickly gritted his teeth and said, no. Zhang Kongyun immediately said, then 3 million yuan. There was another exclamation around. _first post at this time. The villager laughed and said, it looks like a treasure. I won't sell it. I'll buy it at the auction. Zhang Kongyun stared at the villager for a long time, gritting his teeth in hatred. He shook his head helplessly and retreated from the crowd. Zhang Lufang snorted and said, just grab it. He won't sell it for 3 million yuan. Does he only care about money? Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, nonsense. There are so many secular mortals here. Do you want to rob it? How do you deal with the consequences? Not to mention whether it will alarm the government, if other sects find out, aren't you afraid of being ridiculed? We are the Zhengyi school. Zhang Lufang carried Hardadef on her back and looked at the villager who was still showing off in the field in disappointment. What should we do? Zhang Kongyun sighed and said, since he wants to auction it, he can't run away anyway. We'll go back and find someone to keep an eye on him. If someone wants to rob it, we'll wait for him to get it, and then we'll rob him. If no one wants to rob it, we'll see who is richer at the auction. Zhang Liufang's worry turned into joy. That's right. Is our Zhengyi school short of money? However, Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, that's not necessarily true. If the cultivation world knows that the Medicine King tripod has been auctioned, it will definitely turn the world upside down. At that time, there will be another storm. As he said this, he sighed and said, let's go. This trip was not in vain. Finally, we know the whereabouts of the Medicine King tripod. Just as Zhang Kongyun was about to return to Mount Longhu with Zhang Lufang and the dumbfounded Hardadef, Chris, Feng Na, and Xing Cheng were overjoyed and rushed to where Hardadef had been. But when Chris arrived at the place again, she found that Hardadef had already disappeared. Chris suddenly became anxious and shouted around like an ant on a hot pan, Hardadef. Hardadef. Feng Na looked around and asked sympathetically, is it here? Chris stamped her feet and said anxiously, it's here. I remember it clearly. By the way, Yan Hua said that he would help look after Hardadef. Where is he? Feng Na comforted her softly, Chris, don't worry. Maybe Yan Hua took Hardadef to another place. However, Chris said anxiously, Hardadef is so badly injured. How can he be moved? Xing Cheng, who was standing to one side, had sharp eyes. She saw a person coming out of the jungle. It was Yan Feng, so she quickly pointed and said, hey, he's here. Chris immediately rushed to Yan Feng and said anxiously, Yan Hua, what are you doing? Yan Feng looked as if nothing had happened. He smiled and said, I went to the toilet. What's wrong? What happened? Chris looked frightened, and an ominous thought flashed through her mind. She said in a trembling voice. What? You went to the toilet? Hardadef isn't with you? The smile on Yen Fang's face slowly froze. He pretended to be surprised and said, What's wrong with Hardadef? What happened? Chris's heart sank bit by bit. She only felt that her hands and feet were cold. She said, Damn it, Hardadef couldn't have. As she said this, she immediately rushed to the edge of the cliff and looked down with wide eyes. However, the slope of Mount Huangshan was steep. Although it was halfway up the mountain, the forest at the foot of the mountain was dense. Even an army might not be able to find it, let alone a person. The more Chris looked at it, the colder her heart became. The more she thought about it, the more flustered she became. Ching Ching suddenly pointed at Chris's feet and said, Hey, look. Chris and the others looked in the direction Ching Ching was pointing, only to see a few indistinguishable footprints beside the cliff, and the weeds next to them were also very messy. Chris's heart suddenly trembled, and she said in fear, Could it be? Yen Fang saw that everyone was guessing according to his plan. She was overjoyed, but her face was full of fear. Did Hardadef roll down just now? Her words made everyone's hearts skip a beat. Chris knelt down beside the cliff. She remembered that Hardadef had fallen off the cliff in order to save her. She had found him with great difficulty and found that he was not dead, but he had still not been able to escape the claws of death. For a moment, Chris was so sad that she burst into tears. Yen Fang also looked sorrowful and remorseful, and said repeatedly, It's all my fault. I should have kept an eye on him. I shouldn't have left. Seeing Yen Fang constantly blaming herself, Feng Na also sighed and said, It's not certain now. Yen Hua, you don't have to blame yourself too much. Let's hurry down the mountain and look for him again. After she finished speaking, Chris immediately stood up and ran down the mountain like crazy. After they arrived at the foot of the mountain, even with the help of the locals, they were still unable to find Hardadef's whereabouts. The only local who had seen Hardadef lived on the other side of the mountain and had not been able to meet Chris and the others. After searching for a long time, seeing that it was almost night, Chris and the others finally gave up. After leaving their contact information with the locals, they set off on their journey back to Tiannan City. Along the way, Chris's heart was heavy. After saying goodbye to Feng Na, she returned to Li Yundong's residence. But just as Chris entered the building, she saw Ling Yu arguing loudly with two men in suits at the door. The two men in suits were kneeling at the door, their backs straight, blocking the door tightly. One of the men pressed his hands on his knees and said loudly in Chinese, I'm Sionji Tsunekatsu of Jinyan Tantrism. I came to see leader Li Yundong on the order of Masako Tachibana. Please introduce me. Make up for the missing chapter, and today's 2 updates are still the same. Chapter 590. Obviously, it was not the first time that Ling Yu of the Fox Zen School had dealt with this man. She said angrily, I told you that our leader is in seclusion. Can't you keep your voice down? Sionji Tsunekatsu stared at her and said, Seclusion? In a place like this? Do you think we are all fools? Ling Yu said angrily, Do you care where our leader is in seclusion? Even if he is in seclusion here, what does it have to do with you? There was a flash of anger in Sionji's eyes, but he suppressed it and said, I will never leave until I see leader Li Yundong. A man next to him also said in a loud voice, We want to see leader Li Yundong. Please introduce us. The little foxes behind Ling Yu also came over one after another and said, Why are you two so annoying? I said that the leader is in seclusion. Why are you always shouting? What on earth is the matter that makes you so anxious? Can't you wait a few days? Sionji Tsunekatsu said, Masako Tachibana sent me to deliver a letter and made an appointment with him before the Okunin, but leader Li Yundong did not reply to me. Ling Yu was shocked. She looked at Sionji Tsunekatsu up and down and said in surprise, Did you send it? At this time, Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School heard the noise and came out one after another. Chao Yi saw two Japanese men blocking the door tightly. She couldn't help frowning and said, "I can let the leader reply to you first. He has already received the letter. It's not certain whether he will go or not. Go to see the net." Bubble 8. Saionji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but say angrily, "How can that be? Leader Li Yundong must go." Chao Yi frowned and said angrily, "What? If he doesn't go, do you want to kidnap our leader?" Saionji Tsunekatsu said loudly, "A real cultivator should not retreat in the face of a challenge. He is timid and cowardly." When Ao Wushuang heard this, she couldn't help but come out and say coldly, "Since you are a cultivator of Jinyan Tantrism, are you a warrior or a monk? Why do you speak so murderously? The Jinyan Tantrism that I know does not believe in such a murderous dogma." Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that Ao Wushuang was as beautiful as a peach and as cold as frost. Although she was extremely beautiful, she exuded a strong aura that could not be violated. He suddenly became a little more polite and said, "The way we believe in is different from the way you believe in. You Han people believe in peace, but we Yamato people believe in martial arts. Therefore, in our opinion, martial arts is the Tao, and the Tao is martial arts. It's shameful for sect leader Li Yundong to avoid the battle. He should be ashamed and commit suicide." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "When I went to the Kongabuji temple more than a decade ago, you weren't like this. How did you become like this now?" "Humph, before Li Yundong left, he asked me to temporarily exercise the power of the leader. I can make decisions for him. Let me tell you, although our sect leader is also a cultivator who values peace and is a broad-minded cultivator, he is not a person who can let any cat or dog ride on his neck. Go back and tell your Masako Tachibana that when he comes out of seclusion, he will definitely come to visit and let her know what a real strong person is." However, Saionji Tsunekatsu looked straight at Ao Wushuang and said stubbornly, "No, I must wait for him here. Logically speaking, he should have set off immediately after receiving the letter. He has been delayed for 2 days. This is a great disrespect to Masako Tachibana and a disgrace to us." Ao Wushuang looked at him coldly and shook her head. "You Japanese learn everything from others, but you don't learn anything like it. When our Chinese civilization was at its peak, your ancestor, Master Hongfa, specially crossed the ocean to our mainland to learn Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. But unfortunately, more than 1,000 years have passed, and you still haven't learned the essence of our Chinese civilization. Don't you know what it means to not do to others what you don't want to do to yourself? Are you willing to accept someone forcing you like this?" Saionji Tsunekatsu also sneered and said, "Our Yamato people only know that the winner is the king and the loser is the bandit. If sect leader Li Yundong doesn't dare to go, just say it. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Don't you think it's shameful to hide under the excuse of seclusion?" This sentence made everyone in the Fox Zen school furious at the same time. Ling Yu and the little foxes scolded angrily, "What did you say? Say it again if you dare. Will our leader be afraid of you?" "That's right. Our leader scared your Tachibana Wakako to tears with one palm. Do you still have the face to mention this matter?" When Saionji Tsunekatsu heard their words, he was so angry that he gritted his teeth secretly. He knew very well that if Tachibana Wakako hadn't been so badly defeated this time, she wouldn't have lost her temper and ordered him to make sure that Li Yundong came to Japan no matter what. In fact, Jinyan Tantrism was like the Chinese Chuanjin sect and Jinyi school. There were many sects under one sect. For example, there were Chuanjin Dragon sect, Chuanjin Green Cave sect, Chuanjin Yuxian sect, Chuanjin Nanhua sect, and so on. And there were different schools under these sections. Compared with the Chinese cultivation world, which was full of disasters, Jinyan Tantrism was located in Kongabuji, and its incense had not been cut off for thousands of years. It was not like another sacred mountain in Japan, Mount Hai, which had been washed with blood by Oda Nobunaga and suffered a huge disaster. After more than 1,200 years of development, Jinyan Tantrism, which was founded by Hongfa in the beginning, was divided into Ono School and Hirazawa School. Ono School and Hirazawa School each gave birth to 6 schools, which were collectively known as the Nozawa 12 schools. As time went on, these 12 schools slowly gave birth to 36 schools and more than 70 schools. Most of these schools of Xinyan Tantrism could be classified into the School of Ancient Meaning and the School of New Meaning. They were also the 2 schools with the fiercest struggle with each other, just like the Niden School and the External Alchemy School in the Chinese cultivation world. In the Edo period of Japan, the School of Ancient Meaning occupied the ancestral court of Xinyan Tantrism, Mount Koya, while the School of New Meaning left Mount Koya under the exclusion of the School of Ancient Meaning and occupied Mount Zhi and Mount Feng. After a long period of open, secret fighting, the School of Ancient Meaning and the School of New Meaning were scarred by each other. The cultivators of the 2 sects, who could not bear the torture, reached an agreement under the mediation of the Emperor of Japan in the 5th year of Meiji. Mount Koya was initially set as the general base of the School of Ancient Meaning, and Mount Zhi and Mount Feng were the general base of the School of New Meaning. The monks of the 2 sects and the 3 mountains were taking turns to serve as the chief steward of the Xinyan sect, leading all the temples of the Xinyan sect in the world. However, because both of the 2 sects wanted to hold the position of the chief steward of the Xinyan sect for a long time, the 2 sides began to fight openly and secretly again. The School of Ancient Meaning gradually gained the upper hand in the battle between the 2 sects by virtue of the awakening of the powerful bloodline power of the Masako family. Masako Tachibana also laughed proudly in the entire Japanese cultivation world in the 10 years of fighting. However, seeing that the quadrennial election ceremony for the chief steward was about to be held, in order to compete for this position, the 2 sects were working hard to build momentum among the people. At this critical moment, there was a scandal that Masako Tachibana's daughter, Tachibana Wakako, was frightened by a Chinese cultivator and cried. This was tantamount to throwing a heavy atomic bomb in the entire Japanese cultivation world. The School of New Meaning, which was originally hostile, immediately gloated and publicized it. Some of the other schools of Ancient Meaning also angrily questioned Masako Tachibana and raised questions. Saionji Tsunekatsu still clearly remembered that when Masako Tachibana was in the lobby of Okunin, she was besieged and questioned by the masters of many schools of Ancient Meaning. Her weak body was almost drowned. Although these schools all belonged to the School of Ancient Meaning, Masako Tachibana had occupied a high position for too long, which made other schools extremely jealous. Therefore, even within the School of Ancient Meaning, there were fierce battles and undercurrents surging. Under the discussion of the goddess Tachibana Wakako and the 413th great monk of Kongabuji Temple, Kaisai Hikaryuni, they agreed that since Li Yundong had brought them shame and disaster, they had to defeat him in front of all the people in the Japanese cultivation world. Only in this way could the current crisis be resolved. However, as the youngest and most promising monk of Kongabuji Temple, known as Changsheng Vajra, Saionji Tsunekatsu, came to Tiannan City with the heavy responsibility of Masako Tachibana on his shoulders. However, the letter of challenge he sent was like a clay ox sinking into the sea, and there was no news. Seeing that the quadrennial election ceremony of Japanese Xinyan Tantrism was about to begin, he couldn't even see Li Yundong. How could he not be anxious? In the face of the ridicule of the Fox Zen school, Saionji Tsunekatsu was anxious and angry. His eyes gradually revealed a fierce light, and his back slightly straightened, like a beast that was about to choose people to devour at any time. He thought to himself, Li Yundong is a coward. He doesn't dare to show up, so he let a group of women come out to be his shield. Damn it! Saionji Tsunekatsu clenched his fists and trembled with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, Tachibana Wakako is just a little more than 10 years old. What's there to be proud of when you beat her? If you have the ability to beat our Tachibana Wakako, then you are powerful. Ao Wushuang saw that he was so stubborn that it was almost impossible to communicate with him. She still wanted to speak, but Ling Yu said impatiently, Shu, don't talk to him. It's useless. I've told him many times that the leader is in seclusion, but he just won't listen. If he wants to kneel, let him kneel. At this time, Chris, who had been watching for a long time, finally couldn't help it. She stepped forward and said to Saionji Tsunekatsu, Li Yundong is indeed in seclusion. It's useless for you to urge him. Saionji Tsunekatsu turned his head and saw a blonde foreign woman speaking to him in fluent Chinese. He was stunned, but replied in English, "Who are you?" Chris also replied in English, "I'm Chris." Saionji Tsunekatsu asked, "I mean, how can you be sure that Li Yundong is in seclusion?" Chris said, "I'm his registered disciple. Before I left, I saw him in seclusion." Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked and immediately looked at Chris carefully. He recognized from Chris's accent that she was an American, but this American said that she was Li Yundong's disciple. Saionji Tsunekatsu said in surprise, "You are his disciple?" Chris shook her head and said, "No, I'm just a registered disciple, not a disciple yet." For a moment, Saionji Tsunekatsu looked at Chris in a daze and couldn't speak for a long time. In the eyes of many Japanese, they were most afraid of the United States, but the one they despised and looked down upon the most was precisely China, which was separated from them by a strip of water and the source of their culture. But in the end, this American had become the disciple of the Chinese? It seemed that the American was begging to be his disciple, and this Li Yundong was hesitant to give her the status of a registered disciple? What was going on? Chris saw that Saionji Tsunekatsu did not speak, so she walked over to Ling Yu and the others and said to him, "If you don't believe me, you can keep waiting, but please be quiet." Since the end of World War II, the Americans had always been the emperor of the Japanese people. Decades of national imprint had been deeply engraved in the bone marrow of the Japanese, making them feel that they were inferior to the Americans. Even the cultivators were no exception. Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes widened as he watched Chris and the others enter the door, and then the door closed indifferently. For a moment, he could not come back to his senses and was speechless. A young man on the side couldn't help but say anxiously, "Changsheng, what should we do now?" Saionji Tsunekatsu calmed down, and he quickly came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, I don't believe he's not inside. I clearly saw him go in and never come out." With that, he quickly pinched a few fingers and snorted coldly, "I don't believe that I can't force him out. I had something to do in the evening and came back very late. Sorry. Try to write another chapter, but it may be very late. Don't wait, maybe you will be urged to go to sleep in the middle of the code. If so, then you can only write the second chapter tomorrow morning. What a pity." Chapter 591. Saionji Tsunekatsu's hands quickly formed a seal. The ring and little fingers of both hands curled up, and the thumb, index finger, and middle finger stretched out straight. The fingertips of both hands faced each other and pressed down on the ground. Jinshi flowed all over his body, and soon a red cinnabar red dot appeared between his eyebrows. This red dot threw out a red light, just shining on the center point of the two fingers. Go to see the net. Bubble 8. In an instant, a flowing white mist appeared in the place where Saionji Tsunekatsu's fingers were framed. In the white mist, the scene of Chris, Ling Yu, and others talking in the room clearly appeared. Saionji Tsunekatsu snorted coldly. With a turn of his mind, the white mist quickly changed into the scene of the room of Li Yundong and others inside. However, Saionji Tsunekatsu searched around, but he never found Li Yundong's figure. He was stunned and unwillingly searched another room. However, he searched around and almost searched all the rooms in the building, but he never found Li Yundong's figure. Saionji Tsunekatsu was shocked. He stayed where he was and looked at the man next to him, who was also stunned. He couldn't help saying, "Tuki-kun, what should we do? Where did Li Yundong go?" Tuki-kun was also stunned and said, "Changsheng, didn't we stare at the door and don't see him come out? Does he know how to make himself invisible?" Saionji Tsunekatsu was a little annoyed and said, "Living in the busy city, what are you doing with this kind of shameful magic?" Tuki-kun said with a face full of fear, "Changsheng, if we can't finish the task, what should we do? If Masako Tachibana blames us, then..." Saionji Tsunekatsu's face was gloomy and his teeth were clenched. Tuki-kun suddenly said tentatively, "Changsheng, how about, we kidnap one of Li Yundong's men and force Li Yundong to go with us. Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately turned his head and scolded, "Idiot. What kind of idea is this? Didn't you see that there was a woman who looked very powerful just now? Although I am sure that I can beat her and send the letter of challenge to their home without anyone knowing, I am not sure that I can take a living person away without anyone knowing. If there's a conflict and the local government is alerted, how are you going to deal with it?" The monks of Jinyan Tantrism were divided into 16 ranks. Among them, the great monk was the highest rank monk. His divine power and Buddhist dharma were extremely powerful and abnormal. At a young age, Saionji Tsunekatsu obtained the title of the 12th rank young monk. Not only was he allowed to wear a purple and gold kasaya, but his status and strength were far above that of Tuki, who was the 9th rank monk. As soon as he scolded, Tuki's face immediately turned red. He did not dare to refute and repeatedly admitted his mistakes. Ling Yu and the little foxes had been watching TV before. After being harassed by Saionji Tsunekatsu, they put it down for a while. At this time, when she was reminded by her junior sister, she immediately sat aside excitedly and asked, "Which episode is it? Hey! Why is it the news? Who changed the channel? I don't want to watch the news. Change the channel, change the channel." Just as the little foxes were about to change the channel, they heard Chris suddenly shout in surprise, "Don't change it, don't change it. Look, look, what's this?" The little foxes first looked at Chris strangely, only to see her rush to the TV with a face full of excitement, pointing at it and shouting. Chris's strange behavior attracted everyone's attention. Even Ao Wushuang, who had always been indifferent, couldn't help but look back at her. But when Ao Wushuang saw it, she was so shocked that her whole body trembled and her eyes widened. On the TV screen that Chris was pointing at, a reporter was interviewing a man dressed as a villager. The man was holding a purple-gold three-legged tripod furnace in his arms. The tripod furnace was surrounded by a white mist. At first glance, it was obvious that it was not an ordinary item. What else could it be if not the Medicine King tripod? Even though Ao Wushuang was used to great storms, she couldn't help but exclaim, "The Medicine King tripod?" As soon as everyone in the Fox Zen school heard the words, "Medicine King tripod," they all shivered. Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong both stared at the TV with their eyes wide open. The little foxes were even more shocked and said, "No way, a supreme powerful magical weapon for alchemy like the Medicine King tripod is actually on the news. What the hell is going on? How could such an important powerful magical weapon be picked up by this guy?" After the battle on Tiandu Peak, Chris had a very deep impression of the Diyuan Jindan and the Medicine King tripod. In her opinion, it was because of these two mysterious Eastern treasures that a terrible battle had occurred, and her fate had been completely changed since then. Ling Yu stared at the Medicine King tripod with her eyes wide open and said in surprise, "Is this the powerful magical weapon of the legendary king of traditional Chinese medicine, Sun Simiao? So this is what it looks like." The little foxes also gathered in front of the TV, wishing they could stick their eyes on the TV screen. They carefully looked up and down at the legendary powerful magical weapon. For a moment, they sighed and said, "Oh, the Medicine King tripod is so beautiful. Yes, this guy is holding the Medicine King tripod. Isn't he afraid of getting into trouble? Tut, you're so stupid. Didn't you see that he called all the reporters here? Now that it's exposed, everyone in the world will know that he has the Medicine King tripod. At that time, even the cultivators who want to kill him will be afraid. That's right, Shiji, you're so smart." The little foxes chattered. At this time, the TV news switched back to an old expert. The old expert had silver hair and was seriously expressing his views and opinions on the cultural relics that the villager had picked up. When Ao Wushuang heard the expert use vague words to infer the origin of this cultural relic, she couldn't help but frown and whisper, "What are they going to do with such great fanfare?" She was full of doubts, but soon the picture changed back to the host. The host said, Quan Jincheng, a villager in the Huangshan scenic area of Anhui province, claims that this treasure is his family heirloom. On the first day, someone offered a high price of 3 million yuan to buy it from him, but Quan Jincheng refused. Now the villager says that he wants to auction the treasure, and only the highest bidder can get it. Hearing this, the people in the room suddenly burst into an uproar. Ling Yu said in surprise, "What? This person actually auctioned the Medicine King tripod? Isn't this too ridiculous? How much money would it cost to buy it?" Chao Yi also stamped her feet and said, "Damn it, leader is in seclusion, and we can't tell him this news. What should we do?" At this time, almost everyone looked at Ao Wushuang and regarded her as the pillar at this time. Ao Wushuang pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Don't panic. Such a treasure will definitely not be auctioned in a short time. Even if we want to evaluate it, it will take some time. I hope that leader can come out of seclusion during this period of time." However, Ling Yu said with a sad face, "Oh, it's not easy for leader to come out of seclusion. We don't lack anything now, but money. Where can we raise money for the auction? Should we sell the Desanxian store?" The other little foxes immediately shook their heads like a rattle drum. No, we won't have any pocket money if we sell it." Chao Yi also shook her head and said, "That shop won't be worth much even if we sell it. This Medicine King tripod will definitely be sold at a terrifying price. I'm afraid it's not something we can afford." Chris was listening attentively. She suddenly said tentatively, "If you're short of money. I seem to have a little." "You?" Everyone's gaze shifted to Chris. Chris hesitated for a moment, but she quickly bit her lip and nodded firmly. "Well, I still have a few million." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. That was a few million. That's not a small number. It seems that leader has chosen a rich little woman as his disciple. However, Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, "A few million is not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth. If a powerful magical weapon like the Medicine King tripod is sold for a few million, then you really look down on our Chinese cultivators. Let alone others, the financial resources of Jingyi School, Chuanjin Dragon Sect, External Alchemy, and even other inconspicuous sects like the Jinshan sect are beyond our imagination." Chris said awkwardly, "But I only have this much. What should I do?" Ao Wushuang thought for a moment and said, "While the leader hasn't come out of seclusion, let's raise money first. I'll also think of a way to raise as much as I can. We can only take one step at a time. Let's do our best and leave it to fate." At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was outside the door, heard this. He immediately stood up, and Tuki, who was next to him, also stood up and said angrily, "Damn it, we were guarding in front, but Li Yundong ran away from behind. Is he a rat?" However, Saionji Tsunekatsu's eyes flickered and he didn't answer him. After a long time, he suddenly turned his head and said to Tuki, "Tuki, immediately report to Masako Tachibana that the alchemy supreme magical weapon of the Chinese cultivation world, the Medicine King tripod, has appeared. She will definitely be interested when she hears it. With the financial resources of our Jinyan Tantrism, if we participate in the auction, it will be easy. At that time, whether we take this powerful magical weapon for ourselves or lure Li Yundong to Mount Koya, I think he can no longer escape." When Tuki heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. "Changsheng, this is a good idea. Killing two birds with one stone. He deserves to be the youngest and most promising young monk." Saionji Tsunekatsu snorted coldly and said, "Let's go. When the time comes, I want to see what kind of expression Li Yundong will have when he sees the supreme magical weapon of the Chinese cultivation world fall into our hands." After that, he sneered and left with a flick of his sleeve. At this time, in Mount Tianlong of Dongwu City, thousands of miles away from Tiannan City, Li Yundong, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were just in the deepest closed-door meditation. Yesterday's second day. Chapter 592. Li Yundong left his home in Tiannan City with Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others and went to the secret room of the Fox Zen School of Mount Tianlong. However, because he had sealed the stone cave before, Li Yundong had to use the Fan of Seven Treasures to enter from the back door of Mount Tianlong. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. After entering the stone room of Mount Tianlong, although the surroundings were closed and the yin qi in the mountain was quite heavy, it was quiet and no one would disturb them. Therefore, Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others quickly entered meditation and cultivation. Unlike the last time when he was in a coma, Li Yundong took the initiative to mobilize the Jinqi in his body and began to refine his yang spirit and Niden according to the Taoist cultivation method. Li Yundong sat cross-legged in the center of the stone room where the mystical silver fox had left the heavenly Jin Dan technique. There was a futon under his feet. His body was straight and his head was flat, his tongue was on the upper jaw, and his mind was empty. After a while, the yang spirit went out of his body. At first, Li Yundong's yang spirit body was still the same as his own, but with the flow of Li Yundong's Shinqi, the yang spirit continued to grow, and soon it became the appearance of Wisdom King's Fazhen with 3 heads and 6 arms. Li Yundong was in his own spirit space. While visualizing his Fazhen, he was thinking about cultivation. Especially when Li Yundong's cultivation realm was improving day by day, many things that he couldn't understand in the past were immediately integrated as soon as he reached the realm. How did I cultivate my yang spirit? It was exactly what Mr. Naiwen, Chen Pu, said in the 8th phase of the heavenly Jin Dan technique. The 8th phase of Huayuan is down, and the Zhou Xing is nourishing the baby. Sometimes the fire burns the Dan cave. Go deep into the cold spring to get the red turtle. To put it simply, it was the combination of the yin qi of the left kidney and the yang qi of the right kidney. How could he cultivate the Jinshan? Li Yundong kept thinking about the ancient books he had read in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot, but he couldn't remember how to cultivate the Jinshan for a while. He had asked Ziyuan, but she had told him with a wry smile that even she didn't know. After cultivators reached such a realm, they could only slowly explore it by themselves. Li Jiandong thought for a while and couldn't help but think of the words engraved on the wall by the mystical silver fox in the stone room. He couldn't help but recite the elixir formula of the heavenly Jin Dan technique in his heart, especially the notes left at the end of the technique. These annotations said, ordinary people should practice the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th transformations to strengthen their physique and prevent common diseases. The 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th transformations are very difficult. Those who are not cultivators should be able to put aside worldly affairs and focus solely on cultivation. As for the 9th transformations, it is even more impossible for ordinary people. It requires an absolute treasure on an iceberg, requiring a special person to pluck it. Only then can one cultivate and touch upon it. But how could one cultivate the 9 transformations? Compared to the detailed cultivation method from the 1st cycle to the 8th cycle, Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu seemed to have made up his mind at the most crucial moment. He did not mention how to cultivate at all, and only left behind a poem. The poem said, the 9 cycles of carefree Tao fruit is complete, and 3,000 meritorious deeds become deities. Golden books and jade slips proclaim the imperial edict, and auspicious clouds soar to the 9th heaven. This poem was completely different from the previous 8 transformations poem. There was no mention of the cultivation method between the lines, only the result of cultivating to the 9 transformations. This made Li Jiandong very depressed, and he even speculated maliciously, could it be that Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu himself didn't cultivate to the 9th cycle, so he didn't write it down? Or is this the 9th cycle of his own imagination? Thinking of this, Li Jiandong couldn't help laughing in the spirit space. He quickly swept this idea out of his mind and quickly searched for the many ancient books he had read in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. Although Li Jiandong had cultivated to the primary phase of the Jinshan, after his encounter with Su Ling, he had clearly discovered the terrifying power and fatal flaws of the primary phase of the Jinshan phase. Although it was almost impossible for cultivators in the Yangshan phase or below to defeat a master of the Jinshan phase, it did not mean that the Jinshan phase was really invincible. The primary phase of the Jinshan phase, the unbreakable Jinshan, was not really invincible. Otherwise, Su Ling's protective Jinshan would not have been broken by the three top Yang spirit masters, Li Jiandong, Jing Yuan, and Zi Yuan. Although Su Ling had gone berserk after that and beaten the three of them to the point that they could only fight back, it had also made Li Jiandong clearly realize that although the unbreakable Jinshan was strong, it was not invincible. Moreover, the unbreakable Jinshan seemed to only be strong, but not soft. In other words, the Jinshi of the unbreakable Jinshan only had Yang Qi, but lacked Yin Qi. As the saying goes, fighting is like using a weapon, and the art of war says, win by surprise. In terms of fighting or fighting, it means to overwhelm the opponent with strength and defeat the opponent with skill. In Li Jiandong's opinion, the so-called one person can defeat 10 people with strength was not absolute. Even if Su Ling had the strength of 10,000 kilograms, he, Jing Yuan's Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade and Zi Yuan's ninth heaven Zi Yuan's silk added together could still compete with the opponent through ingenious moves and fighting skills. The reason for this was the softness, ingenuity, and the opponent's too simple Jinshi. The reason why the Yang spirit was stronger than the Yin spirit was that the condensation of energy of the Yang spirit was far stronger than that of the Yin spirit. The Yang spirit could absorb things and fight like a real body. On the other hand, the Yin spirit was just a weak mass of energy. It could only penetrate things but not pick them up. The reason why the Jinshan was stronger than the Yang spirit was that the degree of condensation of the Jinshan was several times that of the Yang spirit. Not only could it pick up things, but it could also cover the body like armor, forming a hard protective shell. When a cultivator's Jinshi was condensed to a certain extent, their soul would undergo a qualitative change. The density of Jinshi would continue to increase, changing from the Yin spirit to the Yang spirit, and from the Yang spirit to the Jinshan. When it was condensed to the highest level, it would be able to challenge the power of heaven. Li Jiandong used to be very puzzled. Why is Su Ling's Jinshan so stiff and rigid? It only knows how to protect its whole body, but it can't change at will like the Yang spirit? According to Li Jiandong's speculation, if the Jinshan could change at will like the Yang spirit and transform into a sharp blade with the power of the unbreakable Jinshan, wouldn't it be invincible? Or if it changed into a shield, wouldn't it be impenetrable by any powerful magical weapon? The Jinshan was originally an extremely condensed Jinshi Yang spirit, but if it could change again and compress into a smaller object, wouldn't the density of the Yang spirit be even more terrifying? But when Li Jiandong cultivated to the primary phase of the Jinshan, he understood that it was not that Su Ling didn't want to change, but that he couldn't. At this time, Li Jiandong felt as if his whole body was shrouded in a ball of flame, and his whole body was full of strong Yuanyang qi. It was as if he was on a flaming mountain. Although his whole body was full of strength, it was all the power of Yang, without the slightest bit of Yin qi. The primary phase of the Jinshan was like hard steel. No matter how the opponent beat it, it could not be broken, so it was called the unbreakable Jinshan. In a fight, if the Jinshi lacked softness, it was easy to lack stamina and only had the power of 3 axes. If the softness lacked hardness, it was easy to be unable to attack for a long time and be unable to settle the score with 1 strike. Li Jiandong felt the situation of his Jinshi at this time, and his heart couldn't help but move. He thought to himself, the human body is a self-sufficient small universe, and I have Yin and Yang qi in my body. Although the Yin qi in my body is different from the Xianyin qi in Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin's bodies, it should also be useful. Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered that when he had borrowed books in the school library, he had read some poems in Zhang Buduan's Wuzhen chapter. There were a few lines in the poem that said, dragon-shaking Mercury comes from the hometown, and Dui Hu Lead is born in the Canfang. The 2 things are born because of the mother, and the 5 elements all go to the center. The moon was only half bright in the sky, and there was already the roar of dragons and tigers. Then he worked hard to cultivate, and in a day, the Neguan Dan was formed. Hua Yu's male tiger roared, and Fusang's female dragon roared at the bottom of the sea. Granny Huang made a matchmaker and sent husband and wife to share one heart. Li Jiandong thought to himself, the meaning of these lines is exactly the cultivation method of the yin-yang 8 trigrams. There's nothing strange about it, but what does the last sentence mean? Is it implying that if cultivators want to go to a higher level, they have to send husband and wife to share one heart? Li Jiandong knew that Zhang Buduan's words originally meant that the yin and yang qi in the body were in line with the Tao of heaven and earth, but it was precisely because of this sentence that it also touched a chord in Li Jiandong's heart. Only when heaven and earth intersected could there be all things. Only when men and women were in harmony could there be babies. Only when the yin and yang qi of the human body intersected could there be Niden. What would happen if the Jinshan, which was extremely masculine, intersected with the extremely feminine qi? Just as he was thinking of this, he suddenly heard a very soft voice coming from afar, as if someone was calling his name. Li Jiandong looked in the direction of the voice with his yang spirit body and saw Su Chan looking at him playfully in a corner of the cave. She was smiling sweetly and her beautiful eyes were full of anticipation. Li Jiandong immediately laughed and went over to her. He said softly with a smile, "Weren't you meditating in the next room? Why did you come out?" Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said in a low voice with some embarrassment, "I don't know how to cultivate after I reach 7 tails, so I came to ask you if you know." Li Jiandong saw that Su Chan's eyes were evasive, and her face was even redder. There seemed to be a touch of autumn water hidden in the corners of her eyes, and there was a shyness in her eyes that was unique to a young girl. His heart skipped a beat, as if he already knew the answer. He said with a smile, "But I don't know either. What should I do?" There was a flash of disappointment in Su Chan's eyes. "Ah. You don't know either? Then what should we do?" Li Jiandong also said with a sad face, "Yes, what should we do?" Su Chan looked at Li Jiandong eagerly, as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. After a long time, she said hesitantly, "I heard from my master that the best and fastest way to cultivate after the Jinshan phase is." Li Jiandong laughed in his heart and thought, "No wonder she's my girl. She thinks the same way as me. It turns out that she came to find me because she had the same idea as me." But Li Jiandong deliberately pretended not to understand and said with a smile, "What is it? Tell me quickly." The look in Su Chan's eyes became more and more bashful, and her cheeks became redder and redder. The porcelain skin on her neck was so red that it looked like it was about to bleed. She lowered her head and bit her red lips. After a while, she seemed to have made up her mind about something. She suddenly raised her head and was about to say something embarrassing. But as soon as the girl raised her head, she saw Li Jiandong looking at her with a faint smile and a mischievous look in his eyes. All of a sudden, Su Chan's heart was as clear as a mirror. Her master knew everything. He was just teasing her. Chapter 593. Facing Li Yundong's mischievous gaze, Su Chan was so shy that she let out a cry and threw herself at him. She buried her head in his arms and kept punching his chest with her pink fists. She said angrily, "You're so annoying. You know it, but you still want to tease me. Is it fun?" Li Yunyang quickly grabbed her fist and said with a smile, "Don't make a fuss. This is not your physical body. You have the body of Yang spirit. You are only one step away from the Jinshan. If you hit it, something bad will happen. Go to the internet. 7KOM. Besides, what if you alarm Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin?" Su Chan was shocked and looked back like a frightened rabbit. When she turned her head, she blinked and said carefully, "Yundong, why don't we go somewhere else to talk?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Okay, let's go out and talk." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Soon, their yang spirits turned into yin spirits and flew out of Mount Tianlong. After flying out of the cave in the mountain, the two of them turned into yang spirits again. They looked no different from ordinary people and walked hand in hand on Mount Tianlong. Su Chan breathed in the fresh air of Mount Tianlong and was in the Taoist temple where the Fox Zen school used to be. She looked around and saw that although the Taoist temple of the Fox Zen school had been empty, it was still open to the local tourism bureau. At this time, there were many tourists coming and going, taking photos as a souvenir. These people saw Li Yundong and Su Chan coming hand in hand. The man was handsome and tall, with an extraordinary bearing, and the woman was beautiful and charming. They were really a pair of immortal lovers. They were all stunned for a moment. When Li Yundong and Su Chan had gone far away, they came to their senses. They wanted to take out their mobile phones to take photos, but they had already disappeared. The tourists whispered to each other about the two of them they had seen, guessing their identities and origins. However, no one could guess that the two of them were actually yang spirits traveling, not real people's bodies. When Su Chan took Li Yundong's hand and arrived in front of the Yin-Yang dojo of the Fox Zen school, she looked around with a sigh and said, "Yundong, did you defeat the masters of the 6 sects here?" Li Yundong also looked around and saw that the place that had been damaged before had already been repaired, especially the 2 big copper tripods that he had thrown back and forth. The incense ash inside had accumulated a thick layer. He also sighed with emotion and said, "I used to think that these cultivators were the masters of the masters, but now it seems that they are just so." Su Chan looked at him with admiration and said softly, "It's a pity that I didn't get to see you drive away the 6 sections." Li Yundong gently stroked the girl's hair with his hand and said with a smile, "What's so good about that?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "No, at least I can be by your side to help you. Ever since you reached the foundation establishment stage, I haven't been able to help you. I've always felt very sad and guilty in my heart." Li Yundong smiled and put his arms around Su Chan's slender waist. "Don't be silly. You being by my side is the greatest help you can give me." Su Chan raised her head and said boldly and shyly, "Yundong, in fact, you know how to cultivate Jinshin further, don't you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't you know it too?" Su Chan's face was flushed like a ripe apple. She said shyly in a low voice, "I just guessed, and I haven't verified it. But Master seems to have also said that after reaching the Jinshin phase, the best way to make rapid progress in cultivation is through Karma Mudra." Li Yundong hugged the girl and said with a smile, "You haven't reached the Jinshin phase yet. Aren't you afraid that I'll take your Yuanqi?" Su Chan shook her head hard and said, "No. It's not easy for me to wait for you to reach the Jinshin phase. It's fine as long as you don't lose anything. I don't care. Besides, I'm a 7-tailed fox spirit now. Don't underestimate me." Li Yundong laughed and said, "How could I dare to underestimate you, Lord Fox Immortal? But my Lord Fox Immortal, how do you think we should do Karma Mudra?" Su Chan lowered her head with a red face and said shyly, "You're so annoying. Didn't you read all the cultivation classics? Why are you still asking me?" Li Yundong spread his hands and said, "How could a gentleman like me read these things?" Su Chan burst into laughter. She scratched her cheek with her fingers and said with a smile, "Shame on you. You're so shameless." Li Yundong pinched Su Chan's fingers and said with a smile, "Well, tell me. Didn't you teach me Karma Mudra last time? Why don't we start with Karma Mudra first?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said with a sweet smile, "That's good. Anyway, we are yang spirit bodies now, and it's not convenient for us to go back." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, let's try this Karma Mudra first." As he said this, he lowered his head and kissed Su Chan's rosy lips. Su Chan closed her eyes, opened her red lips slightly, and raised her head to meet him. At this time, Li Yundong and Su Chan's yang spirits were out of their bodies. One was the purest Yuanyang Qi, while the other was the purest Yuanyin Qi. The mouth was one of the 7 apertures of a person. When they met, their yang qi and yin qi involuntarily leaked out of their mouths because of their passion. As soon as the yin and yang qi collided, there was an earth-shattering explosion. Li Yundong and Su Chan's yang spirits were instantly blown into pieces, turning into countless tiny golden light spots floating in the air. The tourists nearby were shocked and followed the sound. However, when they found the dojo, they saw that it was empty and there was no one there. They felt strange for a while and left one after another. After everyone had left, Li Yundong and Su Chan appeared in a remote corner. Su Chan said in shock, "Yundong, what happened just now? Why do I feel like I was blasted away the moment your power surged over?" Li Yundong's face was also full of fear. He said in a low voice, "I don't know, but fortunately, the two of us don't have physical bodies. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable." Su Chan shook her head like a rattle drum. "There's no reason. Even if it's a physical body, it won't explode if the two of us kiss. You scared me to death just now." Li Yundong frowned and said in a low voice, "Indeed. If kissing could cause an explosion, then human beings would have been extinct a long time ago." Thinking of this, Li Yundong also felt that this phenomenon was really absurd. Su Chan also frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "Is it because both of us have yang spirit bodies? But, there's no reason for a yang spirit body to explode with a kiss, right?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but recite softly, "The white tiger of the western mountain is rampant, and the azure dragon of the eastern sea is unstoppable." First he must observe the 5 thieves of Tianming, then he must observe the people. The people of Min and Guofu sought a battle, and only after the battle could they see the saints. The generals must be divided into left and right armies, and I will be the guest. I advise you not to underestimate the enemy in the face of battle, lest you lose my family's priceless treasures. Hearing Li Yundong reciting these poems, Su Chan couldn't help but ask curiously, "Isn't this a poem from Zhang Buduan's Wuzhen chapter?" Li Yundong nodded. His face was still deep in thought, but his eyes were getting brighter and brighter, as if he had thought of something. He said, "Chaner, have you noticed that these lines of poetry happen to be talking about us?" Su Chan thought about these poems carefully and said, "The white tiger of the western mountain mentioned in the first sentence. Is it referring to me? The azure dragon of the eastern sea is referring to you?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, the first sentence refers to the yin qi of a cultivator, and the second sentence refers to the yang qi of a cultivator. If these two qis are extremely strong, once they are combined, they can turn into purple gold frost, and the purple gold frost refers to the purple gold core, which is the Niden of the Jinshin phase. But if you want to cultivate such a Niden, you have to go through a battle of yin and yang qi." Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, "I know that. But why did it explode?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry, look down. First, we need to observe the 5 thieves of Tianming, and then we need to observe the land to pacify the people. The people seek war, and only after the war can we see the sage. Do you know what these words mean?" Su Chan knew that Li Yundong was testing her. She was not a fool. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Does this mean that we should formulate a method suitable for our own physical conditions to fight according to the situation of our own bodies?" Li Yundong nodded and praised, "Yes, that's what it means. The Yin Talisman scripture says that there are 5 thieves in the sky, and those who see them will prosper. Zhang Gua, a great cultivator of the Tang dynasty, once commented that the 5 thieves are life, matter, time, work, and spirit. What I mean is that only when we have nurtured these 5 to their best condition and achieved the right time, place, and people, can we fight with yin and yang. Only in this way can we see the sage. Otherwise, it will be advising the king not to underestimate the enemy before the battle, lest he loses his priceless treasures." Su Chan's face suddenly fell, and she said bitterly, "No way. Will there be a problem with little dual cultivation? Don't you want to live?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "The higher the cultivation, the easier it is to have problems. If it weren't for the fact that both of our yang spirits have been cultivated to the top level, I'm afraid that we would have lost our family's priceless treasures." Su Chan pouted unhappily. For a moment, she was speechless. Seeing her unhappy face, Li Yundong couldn't help but smile and say, "Don't be unhappy. In fact, I have a way." Hearing this, Su Chan immediately beamed and said, "What way?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's very simple. Treat me as an enemy, and then the two of us will have no problem kissing each other." Su Chan's eyes suddenly widened and she asked in surprise, "What's the meaning of this?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's very simple. The reason why there was an explosion just now must have been because the two of us were in love, so that the yin and yang qi became extremely strong." The yin and yang qi suddenly collided violently, of course, causing an explosion, just like when the chaos was first formed. But the emotion is because of the heart, and the heart causes the qi and blood of our bodies to accelerate, so that the speed of the jinqi flow will also accelerate. When the jinqi flows faster, our yang spirits will also become stronger. Su Chan suddenly understood and said, "That's right. When my master took me away, he said that when the emotion is aroused, the desire will be aroused, and the desire will mean the end of cultivation." Li Yundong blinked at Su Chan and said with a smile, "So if you treat me as an enemy, then you won't be aroused, and there will be no problem." Su Chan was curious and excited. She giggled and said, "Well, I seem to understand. Let's try again." As the saying goes, the sea can accommodate all rivers, and the wall can stand thousands of feet high, and the wall can be strong without desire. Li Yundong closed his eyes slightly and cleared his mind. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear, without the slightest emotion or desire. Su Chan also calmed her mind and adjusted herself to the state of mind as still as water. At this time, Li Yundong lowered his head and kissed her. Their lips touched gently, and at this time, there was no violent explosion. Su Chan also felt a strong yang qi blowing over her face. She could barely maintain a state of no desire for a period of time, but in front of her was her lover. It was more difficult than ascending to heaven for her not to be aroused, not to be aroused, not to be aroused, and not to be aroused. In addition, foxes were sentimental creatures, and they were the most easily aroused. Once they were aroused, their love was stronger than gold. After being kissed by Li Yundong like this, how could the little girl control herself? For a moment, her yin qi suddenly grew stronger. However, Li Yundong had been in a calm state. At this time, his yang qi was instantly overwhelmed by Su Chan's yin qi. In an instant, Su Chan's yin qi produced a strong suction force, fiercely sucking Li Yundong's yang qi into her body. The second update on the first. Oh my god, it's finally up. It's not easy. I'm exhausted. Chapter 594. All of a sudden, Li Yundong felt that Su Chan's yin qi had become very strong. It was like a huge whirlpool, sucking in all of his yang qi. Go to the internet. Soak in the book bar. Li Yundong was shocked and subconsciously controlled his qi to resist it. However, as soon as he resisted, the two qi of yin and yang immediately intertwined. As soon as the two qi of yin and yang came into contact, Li Yundong clearly felt an unstable force rapidly expanding between him and Su Chan, like a fireball that was constantly growing and would explode at any time. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he soon remembered the poem in the Wuxia chapter written by Zhang Buduan, "Fire is born of wood and hides its edge. If you don't study it, don't attack it by force. If you want to subdue Lord Jin, you have to subdue him." Lord Jin was originally the son of the master. He was sent to live in the West Neighbor School. He recognized him and called him back to the West Neighbor School. What this poem said was that one's yang qi was originally hidden in one's yin qi. If one didn't know the method and forcefully practiced it, he would get into trouble and harm himself and others. If one wanted to solve this problem, he had to find the secret of practicing Jinshin. The secret was that the yang energy that he lacked could be found in the house of the Western neighbor girl, and the yin energy that the Western neighbor girl lacked could be found in the house of the Western neighbor girl. If the two of them became in-laws, they would be able to get what they needed. But even though he understood this truth, he still couldn't understand how his Yuanyang Qi and Su Chan's Yuanyin Qi would explode once they collided. How could he solve the current situation where his Yuanyang Qi and Su Chan's Yuanyin Qi collided? Li Yundong was a little worried, but he suddenly heard a few tourists walking on the other side of the wall next to the Taoist hall. They said with a smile, "Oh, you invited me out to play, so you don't have to be so polite. Besides, it's only right for me to give you a gift. What's yours and mine? Isn't what's mine yours? We're all family. Why are you so polite?" Although Li Yundong was trying the Jinshan dual cultivation with Su Chan at this time, his mind was calm and his ears were listening in all directions. He clearly heard the words of the tourists on the other side of the wall. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered a poem in Zhang Buduan's Wuzhen chapter: when a general is used, he must divide the left and right armies. If he is the master, I will be the guest. Although there was a yin and yang difference between his and Su Chan's qi, it was just the difference between the left and right hands. Why should we be the host and guest? If she wanted to suck it, then let her suck it. Thinking of this, Li Yundong smiled in his heart and let go of his control. His powerful and majestic Yuanyang Qi suddenly rushed toward Su Chan. As soon as Li Yundong stopped resisting, their yin and yang Qi were no longer entangled, and his Yuanyang Qi naturally flowed into Su Chan's body. Su Chan was originally a Yuanyin body. As soon as a powerful Yuanyang Qi rushed into her yang spirit body, she immediately shivered all over. The intercourse of yin and yang was originally the happiest thing in the world. Although Li Yundong and Su Chan were only in Jinshan, when their pure yin and yang Qi merged together without any resistance, it was like two men and women who had just awakened to love. They snuggled up to each other and smelled each other's scent. Although they were not really happy, they were secretly in love. For a moment, Su Chan felt that her head was gloomy and light. She was so happy that she could hardly distinguish between things. Like a child waiting to be fed, she tried her best to absorb this powerful Yuanyang Qi. But after sucking for a while, Su Chan suddenly became alert. She exclaimed in her heart, "Oh, no! Why did I suck Yundong's Yuanyang Qi? Damn it!" Thinking of this, Su Chan suddenly became anxious. She wanted to immediately return Li Yundong's Yuanyang Qi, but as soon as she moved her mind, Li Yundong seemed to know what she was thinking and said, "Don't worry. Follow the qi of the great Zhou and let my qi wander around your body. Naturally, it will come back after a round." At this time, Su Chan was still talking to Li Yundong, but she clearly heard his voice echoing in her mind. She was shocked and widened her eyes, thinking, "Is this the skill of voice transmission?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Fool, we are now in the intercourse of yang spirit qi, so we can sense each other's thoughts." At this time, Su Chan opened her eyes and glanced at Li Yundong. She saw that he was kissing her and looking at her with a smile in the corner of his eyes. The girl suddenly felt happy and winked at Li Yundong. Although the intersection of yin and yang qi was an extremely dangerous thing, and the slightest carelessness could lead to qigong deviation, Zhang Buduan would not have advised the later generations of cultivators in the poem to advise the emperor not to underestimate the enemy in the face of battle, lest he lose his family's priceless treasures. But the two of them were talking and looking at each other. They didn't feel any danger at all. They only felt that it was naughty and fun. While secretly playing, they secretly made love. What they didn't know was that this coincided with the cultivator's free and easy state of mind. For a moment, their qi quickly swam through Su Chan's yang spirit body without any resistance. When this qi swam back again, Li Yundong clearly felt that there was an extra cold Xianing qi in his qi, and Su Chan also felt that there was an extra faint Yuanyang qi in her body, as if there was a looming fire in an ice cave, while Li Yundong was like a clear spring in a dry and hot desert. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong and Su Chan reluctantly separated. After their lips parted, they looked at each other and Su Chan suddenly burst into laughter. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What are you laughing at?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Just now, you were smacking your lips and staring at me with your eyes wide open. You were so silly." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Really? Silly people have silly luck. If it weren't for that, I'm afraid that the two of us would have been blown up again." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with admiration and said, "Yundong, you're so amazing. You taught yourself. No one taught you, but you learned it all." Li Yundong laughed, blinked mischievously at Su Chan, and said, "Do men and women still need to be taught this kind of thing?" Su Chan giggled and said, "You're so naughty. This is dual cultivation in cultivation. Do you think everyone can do it?" Li Yundong looked at Su Chan with a smile. He saw that her originally beautiful face was now a little more pink. It was obvious that she had obtained his yuanyang qi, and the aura all over her body had become a little more enchanting and mature. Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the time when he had first met the little girl. He sighed in his heart and said, "I wonder what the little girl will look like when she cultivates to the realm of the nine-tailed celestial fox in the future. How beautiful will she be?" But as soon as Li Yundong thought of this, he couldn't help but think of Yen Fang's doubts and questions in front of everyone at the Taoist assembly. Every time the nine-tailed celestial fox appears, the world will be in chaos. But if Su Chan cultivates to the nine-tailed celestial fox, will there also be chaos? Li Yundong couldn't help but be shocked. He thought to himself, is this a prophecy or a curse? Or is it the law of the cultivation world? Could it be that the little girl will never cultivate to the realm of the nine-tailed celestial fox for the rest of her life? No, my little girl is very obedient. How can there be any trouble if she stays by my side? Even if she cultivates to the nine-tailed celestial fox, it will be fine. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong's face was suddenly full of thought and he didn't say a word. She couldn't help but ask, "Yundong, what are you thinking about?" Li Yundong came to his senses and said with a smile, "Nothing. I just remembered that when we were together in the past, you said that when we succeeded in our cultivation, we would go to visit the beautiful rivers and mountains all over the country. Now that we have succeeded in our cultivation, do you want to travel around?" Su Chan was overjoyed, but she soon hesitated and said, "But what about Sister Zhou Qin and Sister Ziyuan? Do we leave them alone?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Our young spirit bodies will go out for a walk. We'll be back soon. It won't take long." Su Chan thought for a moment, then nodded with a smile on her face. She held his hand, and the two of them disappeared in an instant. Li Yundong and Su Chan flew into the air hand in hand. Su Chan leaned against Li Yundong's side and said with a sweet smile, "Yundong, where are we going to play?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "We'll go wherever you want to go, okay?" Su Chan blinked her eyes, made a face at Li Yundong, and said with a smile, "You stole my line. That's what I wanted to say." Li Yundong was happy and said with a smile, "Then let me think. Where should we go to play?" "Let's go to the mountain where you used to cultivate, okay?" Su Chan immediately shook her head like a rattle drum. "No, I lived there for too long when I was a child. I know where the flowers and plants are even with my eyes closed. It's so boring. Let's go somewhere else to play, okay?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Then shall we go to Mount Heng? Is that also a place where there are outstanding people?" Su Chan smiled and said, "When we return from the 5 mountains, we don't look at the mountain. When we return from Mount Huang, we don't look at the mountain." "Yundong, didn't we just go to Mount Huang?" Li Yundong scolded with a smile, "You're really difficult to deal with. We didn't go to Mount Huang for sightseeing last time. Why don't we go to Mount Huang again?" Su Chan quickly shook her head and said, "Don't go. That place is terrible. As soon as I go there, I will think of Su Ling and those cultivators who died on Tiandu Peak." Li Yundong spread his hands and said, "This won't do, and that won't do. Tell me a place." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "It's better to go to a fun and exciting place, okay?" Li Yundong saw that although Su Chan was already a seven-tailed fox spirit, and the Jinshan divine sex had made her temperament more mature, she was still a young girl after all. He couldn't help but laugh and said, "A fun and exciting place?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Yes, for example, an amusement park." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Ah. The two of us are now great cultivators. How can we go to an amusement park to play? Are you kidding me? Isn't this a little too childish?" Su Chan pouted and said, "How is it childish?" Li Yundong pretended to think seriously for a while, then suddenly said, "By the way, I got it." Su Chan was delighted and quickly asked, "What?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "A fun and exciting place? Then there's only one." Su Chan grabbed Li Yundong's hand and kept shaking it. Tell me. Li Yundong said solemnly, "Mount Longhu." Su Chan was so scared that she almost fell from the sky. She was stunned and said, "Mount Longhu, the ancestral court of Juni school? How is that fun?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "In the past, we were bullied too much by Juni school. Now we're going to have some fun and play hide and seek. Isn't it fun and exciting? The last time I struck Mount Longhu with lightning, it was very fun and exciting." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open, and excitement gradually appeared in them. She clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Well, if you're not afraid, then I'm not afraid either. Let's go to Mount Longhu now." Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. Let's go to Mount Longhu." Chapter 595. The flying speed of the Yang spirit was extremely fast. Even if it was 1,000 miles away, it was only a matter of a moment. Li Yunyang and Su Chan only flew for a while before they arrived at the distant Longhu mountain in Jiangxi. Watch net. 7 KOM. The last time Su Chan set foot on Mount Gazao, one of the holy lands of Taoism, she was still in awe and trepidation. This time, when she arrived at Mount Longhu, which was known as the supreme holy land of Taoism, she looked at the magnificent scenery under her feet with excitement. Although it was late winter, Mount Longhu was still lush and verdant. The summit was shrouded in clouds and mist, as if it was an 800-mile immortal abode, a 3,000-hectare paradise. Su Chan took a deep breath and sighed from the bottom of her heart. As expected of the first ancestral court of Taoism. Just taking a breath here makes me feel better than cultivating for 30 days. Li Yundong smiled faintly. Mount Longhu is rich in spiritual qi. It can be said to be one of the best in the world. Cultivating here will naturally yield half the results with twice the effort. Su Chan said enviously, "I really envy Jingyi school for having such a good Zhu Ting. If only our Fox Zen school had such a good Zhu Ting mountain." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't be silly. Isn't Mount Tianlong good? As the saying goes, a gold or silver nest cannot compare to our poor nest, isn't that so?" Su Chan giggled. She put her arm around Li Yunyang's arm and said very obediently, "Anyway, as long as my master is there, I'll follow him. I don't care whether Mount Lingshan is in Mount Lingshan or not." Li Yundong laughed, pinched Su Chan's nose lovingly, and said, "You're so sweet. Let's go down." When Su Chan followed Li Yundong down, she found herself at the door of a Taoist temple. She was surrounded by jungle and ancient trees. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Yundong, what kind of Taoist temple is this?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "This is the Taoist temple of the Linggong sect in Ziyuan. You haven't been here yet, have you?" Su Chan's eyes lit up. "Sister Ziyuan's Taoist temple? I have to take a good look." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I know you haven't seen it, so I brought you here to play today." Su Chan blinked. "Yundong, you've been here before?" Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "That's right. Do you remember the last time we went to Mount Gazao, when you flew out of your house and bumped into me and Ziyuan?" Su Chan suddenly said, "Ah, I remember. You seem to have told me that you and Sister Zi Yuan came here that night?" Li Yunyang nodded and said with emotion, "That night, Zi Yuan taught me the Five Thunder magic method here. At that time, I had just reached the Yangshan phase. I didn't expect that in a flash, I would already be in the Jinshan phase." Su Chan also sighed with emotion. "Yes, Sister Zi Yuan is really a good person. When she was hunting me, I thought she was a big bad guy." Li Yundong smiled and tapped the tip of the little girl's nose. "At first, she thought that you were a little fox demon who did all kinds of evil." Su Chan giggled. Fortunately, the weather cleared up after the rain. Otherwise, wouldn't it be like the flood had washed away the Dragon King's temple? One family would no longer recognize one family. When Li Yundong heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He thought to himself, a family. Who exactly is Zi Yuan to me? Family and friends? Confidant? Cultivation companion? Teacher who taught me? Benefactor? Li Yundong clearly knew that although Su Chan had introduced him to the path of cultivation, it was Zi Yuan who had really made him a cultivator. It was this gentle, noble, elegant, and virtuous woman who had silently helped him push him to new heights on the path of cultivation. Such a person, she. Who on earth was she to him? Li Yundong was lost in thought when Su Chan, who was beside him, suddenly said, "Yundong, in a while, it will be the day of Sister Zi Yuan's succession ceremony. At that time, we have to help her. She has helped us so much." Li Yundong came to his senses. He smiled slightly, stroked Su Chan's cheek, and said softly, "This is one of the reasons I came to Mount Longhu." Su Chan was stunned and asked curiously, "Are you here for the ceremony of Sister Zi Yuan's succession of the Linggong sect? But there's still more than a month to go." Li Yundong smiled and said, "The Jingyi school is the biggest variable in whether Zi Yuan can successfully take over as the leader of the Linggong sect. If they want to stop her, there will be endless twists and turns. But Zhang Ling and the others of the Jingyi school have always been against us. I have never known what the leader of the Jingyi school is thinking, so I came here this time to meet the leader of the Jingyi school. It can be considered as throwing a stone to find out the way, and using peaceful means before resorting to force." Book_bar_first post. Su Chan said curiously, "But I heard from my master that the leader of the Jingyi school had been in seclusion for 10 years. Has he come out of seclusion now?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "When I was chatting with Ao Wushuang in private, she mentioned that during the Battle of Tiandu Peak, several masters of lightning retribution had appeared near Tiandu Peak. 2 of them were from the Jingyi school, and one of them was the leader of the Jingyi school. Since his yang spirit has come out, it means that he may have come out of seclusion." Su Chan was shocked and said tongue-tied, 2 masters of lightning retribution. The Jingyi school accounted for 2 of the 5 major lightning retributions? Li Yundong smiled and said, "Otherwise, why is the Jingyi school the #1 Taoist sect in the world?" Su Chan suddenly felt a little scared. She looked around in panic and said in a low voice, "Yundong, the masters of lightning retribution are not to be trifled with. Let's go, shall we?" Li Yundong laughed and scratched Su Chan's cheek. "You're a 7-tailed fox spirit. Why are you afraid? Weren't you full of confidence just now?" Su Chan was a little embarrassed and said shyly, "It hasn't been long since I became a 7-tailed fox spirit. Besides, I'm afraid I'll be a burden to you." Li Yundong laughed and said, "We're not here to make trouble. If we can't beat them, we can run away." Su Chan immediately became proud. "That's good. When it comes to running away, I'm the best." Li Yundong scolded with a smile, "You're not ashamed, but proud. Your master is so powerful. How dare you say that? Aren't you afraid of embarrassing her?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, "I'm not afraid. Master was not as powerful as me before. She only became powerful after meeting Wang Yuanshan. Li Yundong laughed and took Su Chan's hand, saying, "Let's go and visit the leader of the Zhenyi school. Let's see if we can turn a big deal into a small one and a small one into nothing. Even if we can't resolve it, we can still find out the details of the Zhenyi school. When the time comes, we can be prepared." Su Chan saw that Li Yundong spoke casually, but she knew very well in her heart that Li Yundong was no different from breaking into a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. If the Zhenyi school really had evil intentions, it was very likely that the two of them would be sent to their deaths and would most likely not come back. However, Li Yundong was still calm and composed. This kind of confidence, knowing that it was impossible, was based on his super strong fighting strength and talent. Yundong was already so powerful in the Yangshan phase. Now that he had reached the Jinshan, how powerful would he be? Could he beat a master of lightning retribution? Thinking of this, Su Chan couldn't help but become more curious. The fear in her heart gradually disappeared and she became excited. Along the way, she kept talking to Li Yundong. Along the way, they passed through the 99 peaks and 24 rocks of Mount Longhu. Along the way, there were divine wells, elixir pools, flowing springs, and waterfalls. They were bright, beautiful, and graceful. There were strange peaks and rocks on both sides of the river, and the bamboo forest was verdant. It was like a fairyland. Su Chan sighed when she saw it, and Li Yundong also felt relaxed and happy. Unknowingly, the two of them had already arrived at the ancestral court of the Zhenyi school. The Taoist master's mansion appeared in front of them. At a glance, Li Yundong saw that the Taoist master's mansion was located in the north facing south, facing Shangqingshi, with its back against North Mount Hua, Shangqing Palace in the east, and the main peak of Mount Longhu in the west. It was surrounded by a forest of eucalyptus trees, towering ancient trees, and dense shadows. It was solemn and mysterious. In front of the gate of the Taoist master's mansion was a palace-like building with a hanging mountain. It was tall and majestic, standing in front of the stream. There was a plaque with the words, "Taoist Master's Mansion of the Han Dynasty," hanging on it. The huge stone pillar next to it was hung with a couplet. Li Yundong looked at it and saw that the first couplet was written, "Immortal guests in the Qilin Hall." The second couplet was written, "The home of the Prime Minister in Mount Longhu." These few words were written in flamboyant and majestic style. Between the lines, there was a deep sense of history and pride. The momentum of the number one Taoist sect in the world instantly rushed over. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh and say, "They are immortals in heaven and prime ministers on earth. They deserve to be the only major sect in China in the past 2,000 years that can be compared with the Kong family. They deserve to be the number one sect in the Nan Kingdom." At this time, Su Chan saw the palace of the Taoist master's mansion with double eaves and red pillars, red walls and red doors, luxurious architecture, richly carved beams and painted rafters, and magnificent gold and jade. She couldn't help but feel awe in her heart and didn't dare to laugh loudly anymore. She just opened her eyes wide and curiously looked at the core of the Zhenyi school, the ancestral court. Although it was winter at this time, the ancestral court of the Zhenyi school was extremely prosperous, and there was a continuous stream of tourists. Li Yundong and Su Chan followed the tourists through the gate of the mansion. When they arrived at the second gate, Li Yundong and Su Chan saw that there were magnificent halls on both sides of the corridor, such as the Xiantian Hall, the Law Records Bureau, the Commissioner's Office, and the Teaching Hall. The architecture of these two gates was the same as that of the mansion gate, slightly lower in scale and level than the first gate. There were 3 pairs of gates and 6 door gods, majestic and lifelike. The 2 pillars in the middle of the gate were also hung with a couplet. The first couplet was written, "The Tao is high, the dragon and the tiger are low," and the second couplet was written, "Virtue is heavy, ghosts and gods admire." Su Chan was fascinated. She saw that the tourists around her were going to the Jade Emperor's Hall of the 3 Gates, burning incense at the incense altar in front of the hall to worship the gods. Su Chan looked around and felt that the doors, windows, beams, pillars, and eaves of the surrounding buildings were all exquisitely carved. The colors were gorgeous and magnificent, and the environment was solemn, quiet, and elegant. Everywhere was full of the style of a rich and powerful family. It could be called the deep-sea Marquee Gate. As soon as they entered the gate, they felt as if they had entered the vast sea. It was unfathomable. Su Chan couldn't help but lean closer to Li Yundong, as if she was afraid that he would disappear in the next second. She took Li Yundong's arm and asked in a low and nervous voice, "Yundong, where is the leader of the Zhini school? Do you know?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "I don't know either." Su Chan was stunned. "Ah. You don't know either? Then what are you doing here?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It doesn't matter if I don't know. I can ask." As he spoke, he saw a Taoist in a Taoist robe not far away with his back facing him. He pulled Su Chan forward and asked, "Hello, may I ask where your leader is? Can you introduce him to me?" The Taoist turned around and saw Li Yundong and Su Chan at a glance. He was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "It's you? My wife is sick and in the water. I served her by her bed. I owe everyone one update. 2 updates today will not be less, and there will be one more update later." Chapter 596. This Taoist was a Taoist nun. Although she was wearing a Taoist robe and a Taoist crown, it couldn't hide her graceful figure and delicate face. Many tourists took pictures of her as a souvenir. Go to the internet. _book_bar. When the Taoist nun heard someone talking to her behind her, she was stunned for a moment. Then she sneered to herself and thought, "Do you think you can see our leader whenever you want?" But in next to no time, the Taoist nun turned around and saw a handsome and tall man standing in front of her, and there was even an extraordinarily beautiful young girl leaning against him with a sweet smile on her face. She instantly turned pale with fright and blurted out, "It's you?" Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the person standing in front of him was none other than Zhou Ping, who had always been against him. Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong in shock and then at Su Chan. She couldn't help but say in surprise and anger, "How dare you two come here? Do you think there's no one in our Zhini school?" B****. After that, she subconsciously reached into the wide sleeve of her Taoist robe. Li Yundong immediately leaned forward and grabbed Zhou Ping's wrist with his hand. He said with a faint smile, "Do you want to fight here? Look around." Zhou Ping looked around and saw that there were many tourists around. Many people were even taking pictures of them with their mobile phones and cameras. Zhou Ping was extremely angry. She gritted her teeth and said, "Since you know, why did you still come? How dare you barge in without knowing what you're capable of?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "This is a tourist attraction, and I'm also a tourist. Why can't I come?" Zhou Ping glanced at Li Yundong's 5 fingers that were grabbing her wrist. She struggled hard, but felt that his 5 fingers were like iron pincers. No matter how much she used her Jinqi to struggle, she couldn't move at all. Zhou Ping said angrily, "Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have a high cultivation quotient? Let go of me." Li Yundong let go of her hand and smiled slightly. "I don't dare. I just want to see your leader." Zhou Ping rubbed her wrist and glared at Li Yunyang angrily. "Our leader is in seclusion. He won't see you." Li Yunyang chuckled and said, "In the Battle of Tiandu Peak, 2 lightning retribution masters of your Zhini school went to watch from the side. One of them is the leader of your Zhini school. If you say that he is still in closed-door training, I don't believe it." Zhou Ping's eyes widened and she couldn't help but shout angrily, "Nonsense. If our sect leader came out of seclusion, how could my master not know? If my master knew, I would know too. You're spouting nonsense and slandering me. What is our sect leader going to Sky Capital Peak for? With his cultivation, does he still need to fight for Dun Jin Dan?" Li Yundong laughed. "I didn't say that. You said it. I'm looking for your sect leader because I have some personal matters to discuss," not because of some Dun Dan. I would be very grateful if you could help me notify them. Zhou Ping sneered and said, I told you that our sect leader is in seclusion. Even if he is not in seclusion, the sect leader will not see people like you who help the wicked and associate with demons. As she said this, she glanced at Su Chan, her eyes full of contempt and disdain. Su Chan did not want to be outdone and made a face at her. Li Yundong saw that Zhou Ping's attitude was very rude, but he didn't get angry. He smiled slightly and said, I don't believe that your sect leader is in seclusion. You don't even want to notify him. Obviously, you are taking revenge in public. If you don't want to help me notify him, then I will shout directly. As he said this, Li Yundong took a deep breath and was about to shout loudly. Zhou Ping was so scared that her face turned pale. She knew that Li Yundong's aura was not only majestic but also long. When the Desanxian tea shop had opened, Li Yundong's divine dragon absorbing water had shocked her a lot. If this guy shouted, the video of Mount Longhu would go viral on all the major video websites in China the next day. Although the Zhengyi school was now very powerful, it was still very low-key in the mortal world, for fear of attracting more attention from the government. If Li Yundong made a scene, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zhou Ping grabbed Li Yundong angrily and said through gritted teeth, well. You win. I'll go notify you. As she said this, she stomped her feet and turned around to walk back. After taking 2 steps, she turned around worriedly and said angrily, don't play any tricks. While she was talking, she saw 2 Taoists coming over and said with a smile, Eldest Chiji, what are you talking about? What tricks are you talking about? Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong and said, you came at the right time. Help me keep an eye on them. Don't let them walk around. I'll be back soon. After that, she turned around and left. _book_bar, these 2 Taoists were mostly in their 20s, extremely young. Both of them had thick eyebrows and big eyes. Their eyes were bright, and their foreheads were plump, showing that they had excellent cultivation potential. Li Yundong nodded secretly and thought to himself, as expected of the number 1 Taoist sect. 2 random cultivators have such aptitude. Not bad, not bad. However, the 2 young Taoists misunderstood Zhou Ping's meaning and thought that Li Yundong and Su Chan were here to make trouble. When they saw Su Chan's strong fox demon chi, they couldn't help but be shocked and look at each other. One of the young Taoists took a step forward, glared at Su Chan, and shouted in a low voice, how dare a little fox demon be so presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Do you want to die? Su Chan was shocked and completely forgot that she was already a 7-tailed fox spirit. She subconsciously hid behind Li Yundong and looked at the 2 Taoists timidly. As the Taoist spoke, he was about to step forward and take Su Chan down, but he saw Li Yundong standing in front of him like a towering mountain, looking down at him like an insurmountable peak. The Taoist was shocked by Li Yundong's momentum and couldn't help taking a step back for a moment. He looked at Li Yundong warily and asked, who are you? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, the leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong. The Taoist was shocked. You are Li Wu. Li Yundong? He subconsciously almost called out Li Yundong's nickname, but halfway through his words, he realized that it would be too arrogant, so he changed his words. He glanced at Li Yundong, then turned to look at the Taoist beside him and whispered, Shixiang, what should we do? His Shixiang frowned secretly and whispered, what are you afraid of? Does he dare to be presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Besides, he said that he is invincible. Li. Do you really think that he is invincible? Let's see if he is really invincible. The Taoist nodded slightly. With the support of his Shixiang and on the home ground of his own sect, he had become much bolder. He said to Li Yundong, since you are the leader of the Fox Zen school, that's even better. Let me see if you are worthy of your name. After that, he flicked his sleeves. Under the cover of his wide Taoist robe, his fingers pinched a finger seal in his sleeve, and a talisman was hidden in his palm. He pointed it at Li Yundong's chest like lightning. Just as Li Yundong and the two Taoists were entangled, Zhou Ping had already rushed into the private house angrily. At this time, there were no tourists in the private house. Zhou Ping looked around and shouted, "Is there anyone here? Hurry up and ask someone to come out." Not long after she finished speaking, a beautiful woman in a yellow dress came out of the house. This girl was carrying a sword on her back. She had a sweet appearance and a yellow hairpin on her head. Her eyes were full of spirit, as if they could speak. Soon, another woman came out behind her. She looked exactly the same as her and also carried a sword on her back. The difference was that she was wearing a light blue dress and a blue hairpin on her head. Her eyes were quiet, revealing a sense of reservation and shyness. Who else could it be but Deng Yu and Deng Jiao? Zhou Ping was stunned and asked curiously, "Why are you here? Where are the others?" Deng Yu said with a smile, "Eldest Chiji, the others have gone to do their homework. We are on duty today." Zhou Ping sneered and said, "How can these guys let you two newcomers be on duty? Besides, you are the sword souls of the Sanju formation. How can you do this kind of work?" "Humph, they must have bullied you again, right?" Deng Yu said with a smile, "No, we asked for it. You saved our lives, so it's not a big deal to do a little more." A gentle smile appeared on Zhou Ping's face. She shook her head and said, "Hey, you two little girls are so kind-hearted. They are taking advantage of you like this, but you are speaking up for them. Hee, I really don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for the Sanju formation to choose you two soft-hearted little girls as the sword souls." At this time, Deng Jiao also came forward and said softly, "Eldest Shiji, it's really because Shixiang and Shiji are too busy with their homework that we took the initiative to come and be on duty. We feel very sorry for eating and drinking here for free these days, so if we don't do something, we won't be able to sleep peacefully." Zhou Ping smiled and said, "Well, do me a favor. Go to the side peak of the West Mountain and find Shishu Zhang Kongyun. Tell him that someone from the Taoist master's mansion has come to make trouble. Ask him to come and help." When Deng Yu and Deng Jiao heard this, they were shocked. Ever since they had been resurrected in the Taoist master's mansion, they had regarded the people of the Jingyi school as their saviors. These days, they had also learned about the Jingyi school and knew what kind of position it occupied in Chinese Taoism. Deng Yu said in shock, "Someone dares to come to our Taoist master's mansion and act presumptuously? Are they tired of living? Eldest Shiji, where is this person? Let us help you deal with him." Zhou Ping laughed and said, "You? Forget it. You two are powerful in the Sanju formation. Out of the Sanju formation, I can deal with you with one finger. And this guy can deal with me with one finger. Do you think you can deal with him?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other. Deng Jiao covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Is this bad guy so powerful?" Zhou Ping snorted. "So what? This is Mount Longhu. My master is not here now. Only he can deal with this guy. Don't delay. I still have to go back and keep an eye on Song Wei and Zhou Yuan. These two guys usually like to be competitive. Don't cause any trouble." After that, Zhou Ping turned her head and was about to leave, but as soon as she turned around, she seemed to have thought of something. She turned back and said, "By the way, if Shishu refuses to come, you can say that he said last time that as long as this guy takes the initiative to come to him, he will take action. Now it's time for him to fulfill his words." Deng Yu asked curiously, "Eldest Chiji, who is this guy you're talking about?" Zhou Ping looked a little anxious. She said impatiently, "Why are you asking so many questions? Hurry up and go. Every minute you delay is an extra minute of danger. Do you think this is a joke?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao didn't dare to say anything more. They responded in unison and quickly went out of the door, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Chapter 597. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao flew all the way to a Taoist temple on a side peak. They saw that the Taoist temple in front of them was much shabbier than the Taoist temple of the Taoist master's mansion, and it was even worse than the Taoist temple of the Linggong sect in Ziyuan. Go to see. $. Dang Yu stood in front of a low and dilapidated earthen wall Taoist temple door, patted the rusty iron ring on the wooden door, and shouted in a crisp voice, Shibuozhang, are you there? Not long after, a crisp girl's voice came from inside. After a while, the wooden door was opened with a squeak. A young and pleasant face poked out and looked at Dang Yu and Dang Jiao curiously. The girl was Zhang Lufang. She asked curiously, who are you? Why are you looking for my master? Dang Yu stuck her head out and peeked through the crack in the door. She smiled and said, I'm Dang Yu, and this is my sister, Dang Jiao. We were ordered by Shiji Zoping to look for Shibua Zhang Kongyun. Zhang Liufang's eyes lit up. She opened the door with a squeak and said happily, are you the sword souls of the 3 Ju formation? You're so beautiful, and are you twins? Dang Jiao blushed a little at her praise, but Dang Yu accepted it all with a smile. She said, yes, we are twins. Is Shibua Zhang here? We want to ask him for help. Zhang Lufang opened the door and went forward to pull Dang Yu and Dang Jiao with great enthusiasm. While curiously observing their differences, she pulled them inside. As they walked, she said with a smile, my master is inside. Why are you looking for him? Dang Yu said with a smile, we're not looking for him. It's Shiji Zoping. Zhang Lufang asked with a smile, Shiji Zoping? Isn't she on duty today? Why is she looking for master? Isn't she afraid that master will stink her? Dang Yu and Dang Jiao both asked curiously, stink? Zhang Lufang pointed to a short red wall not far away with a smile and said, yes, my master is planting vegetables. He's using manure to make fertilizer. It's so smelly. If you don't mind the smell, you can go and find him. I don't want to go. As she said that, she seemed to have smelled the stench and quickly pinched her nose with her hand. Dang Yu and Dang Jiao looked at each other. The two of them were also girls who liked cleanliness. When they heard this, it was as if the air suddenly smelled, and they hesitated for a moment. But at this moment, a loud shout came from behind the wall of the Taoist temple, hey, you big nose, let go of me, let go of me. Zhang Lufang immediately burst into laughter. She covered her mouth and said, this foreign devil is tormenting master again. While Dang Yu and Dang Jiao were puzzled, they saw Zhang Kongyun turn around the corner of the wall angrily, holding a wooden dipper in his hand. A burly man with blonde hair and blue eyes was hugging his thigh tightly and kept shouting, Master, Master, take me as your disciple. This man was Hardadef. Zhang Kongyun had the divine power of Jinshin, but he didn't dare to use it on Hardadef. He was afraid that if his Jinshi surged, it would aggravate Hardadef's injury. Bookbar, Zhang Kongyun dragged Hardadef for a few steps, only to see that Hardadef was like a sack, hugging his thigh tightly with both hands. He was dragged all the way, but he refused to let go at all. Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he laughed. He raised the wooden dipper in his hand and threatened loudly, hey, if you don't let go, I'll pour manure on you. Hardadef had a silly smile on his face. He raised his head and opened his mouth, looking like he was waiting to be fed. Zhang Lufang, who was standing to one side, was so disgusted that she almost vomited. She looked at Hardadef with a broken face and said loudly, hey, you can't eat that thing. Why are you opening your mouth? Aren't you afraid that master will really pour it in? He can do it. However, Hardadef seemed to turn a deaf ear to her. His mouth was wide open, and he was shouting, as if what Zhang Kongyun was holding was a delicacy in the world, and his face was full of expectation. Zhang Kongyun's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He glared at Hardadef angrily for a long time before he put down the wooden dipper in his hand and said angrily, well, I admit defeat. I don't dare to splash it on you, okay? Let go. Let go. Dang Yu and Dang Jiao had been in Mount Longhu for a long time, so they naturally knew that Zhang Kongyun was a very low-key but extremely powerful great cultivator of the Zhuni school. When they saw that Zhang Kongyun was in such a sorry state because of a blonde foreigner, they couldn't help laughing in horror. Zhang Lufang also kept snickering. She giggled and said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, "This foreigner is a little crazy. I picked him up. This guy is fun. He's been tormenting Master a lot these days." Seeing that Zhang Kongyun was talking to him, Hardadef immediately grinned and said, "Master, take me as your disciple." Ever since Zhang Kongyun had brought Hardadef back, his life had become a mess. This big-nosed man seemed to have endless energy, pestering him all day long to become his disciple. However, at this time, Hardadef's chi was in a mess, and he didn't dare to do anything to him, for fear of aggravating his injury. Now, he was in a difficult position to get off. Zhang Kongyun looked at Hardadef with a headache. He couldn't help complaining loudly to Zhang Lufang, "Hey, you wicked girl, are you just going to watch the fun? This big-nosed man was normal just now. Why is he acting up again? Come and help me get rid of him." Zhang Lufang laughed out loud, made a face at Zhang Kongyun, and said, "Master, I can't help you either. He's hugging your thighs so tightly that I can't pull him away. He's very strong." Zhang Kongyun said angrily, "I don't care. You can use any other means. Anyway, get him away as soon as possible." What a scandal. Zhang Lufang giggled and said, "Master, since he wants to be your disciple so much, just accept him as your disciple." Zhang Kongyun glared at her and said, "Nonsense. How can I accept a foreigner as my disciple?" Zhang Lufang said with a smile, "What does it matter? Anyway, you're just dealing with him. Maybe if you accept him as your disciple, he won't pester you anymore." Zhang Kongyun thought for a moment and still shook his head. No, how can I joke about accepting a disciple? It's not a child's play." Zhang Lufang shrugged at him and said, "Then I can't help you." As she said this, she turned to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao and said, "Did you see it? Master can't go out like this now. Otherwise, if a Jinshan master of the Zhuni school was hugging his thigh and refused to let go, wouldn't people laugh their heads off if they saw him like this?" At this time, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked as if they wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. They all held back their laughter, and their shoulders trembled a little. Deng Yu held back her laughter and said, "Shibua Zhang, Shiji Zhou Ping really has something urgent to do. Why don't you go and have a look first?" Zhang Kongyun rolled his eyes and said, "How can I go like this? Can you think of a way?" Deng Yu suddenly bit her lip in embarrassment. Deng Jiao, who was beside her, suddenly said softly, "Shibua Zhang, Zhou Ping said that you promised Shibua Zhangling before that if that person really came to Mount Longhu, you promised to help him." Zhang Kongyun was stunned for a moment. "I promised Shiji Zhangling? What did I promise her?" As he said this, he turned his face and looked at Zhang Lufang in confusion. "What did I promise her? What person?" Zhang Lufang thought for a moment and said tentatively, "She didn't mean Super Li, did she?" Zhang Kongyun suddenly remembered, and his eyes burst out with a bright light. "Li Wudi. How dare this guy come to Mount Longhu? Hey, little girl, is this guy Zhou Ping is talking about?" Deng Yu said crisply, "I don't know. I think so. Shiji Zhou Ping seems to be very afraid of him." Zhang Kongyun chuckled and said, "Zhou Ping has always been arrogant. She only thinks highly of Zhang Tianhe and doesn't care about the rest of the people. It must be this guy who can make her so afraid. Well, I also want to meet him. Since this guy dares to come to me, I'll go and have a look." As soon as he moved, he felt his feet sink. He saw that Hardadef was still looking up at him with a silly smile on his face and kept shouting, "Master, master. Oh my God, I almost forgot that there was such a burden by my side." Zhang Kongyun suddenly felt a headache coming on. He said angrily, "I'm not your master. Let go of me." Seeing this, Hardadef's face was full of horror. He hugged her even harder and shouted, "Master, don't leave me behind. Zhang Lufang couldn't help laughing. Master, just accept him. It's fun to have a foreign shirdi. Zhang Kongyun's face was full of pain. He tentatively said to Hardadef, "Hey, why don't I temporarily accept you as my disciple for a month? After a month, you won't be my disciple anymore. What do you think?" Zhang Lufang was so angry that she laughed. "Master, you're deceiving yourself. How can he understand what you're saying? How can you bully a fool?" However, Hardadef's face was suddenly full of joy. He nodded quickly and said, Okay, master, master." After that, he immediately let go of Zhang Kongyun's thigh and banged his head on the ground. Seeing that he had finally let go, Zhang Kongyun immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He pointed at Hardadef and said, "In the future, you're not allowed to stand behind me all the time and then suddenly hug my thigh. This is the first rule of the sect. Do you understand?" Hardadef nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Yes, I understand, master." Zhang Kongyun nodded with satisfaction and said, "Then I'm going out now. You stay here and guard the house by yourself. Do you understand?" Hardadef was shocked. He immediately hugged Zhang Kongyun's thigh again and shouted, "Master, take me with you." This time, Zhang Kongyun was prepared. How could he let Hardadef catch him? He quickly flashed and appeared outside the Taoist temple in an instant. He shouted at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, "Why aren't you going?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao seemed to have woken up from a dream and followed Zhang Kongyun out in a daze. Zhang Lufang also ran out with a smile, looking back at Hardadef. She saw that Hardadef had run after Zhang Kongyun for 2 steps before falling to the ground and crying like a child. Zhang Lufang burst out laughing, shook her head, and waved at Hardadef with a smile. "Hey, big nose, take care of the house. We'll be back soon." Because there were many tourists on Mount Longhu at this time, Zhang Kongyun and the others did not dare to fly in the sky. They just shuttled back and forth on the mountain path. Deng Yu asked Zhang Lufang as he ran, "Shiji Zhang Lufang, who is this invincible Li you're talking about? Is he very powerful?" He, finally someone calls me Shiji. I'm so happy. After you come, I'm no longer the youngest disciple of the Jingyi school." Zhang Lufang giggled, but when she mentioned Li Jiandong, her face suddenly showed admiration. She nodded and said, "Of course this guy is powerful. It's a pity that you didn't go to the Taoist assembly." Invincible Li defeated the masters of all the major sects at the Taoist assembly alone, and finally defeated Tachibana Wakako, the witch of Jinyin Tantrism. He saved the face of our Chinese cultivation world without any bloodshed. How could he not be powerful? Think about it, if he wasn't powerful, the cultivation world would have given him a nickname, Invincible Li. Deng Yu asked curiously, "But I see that Shiji Zhou seems to hate this guy very much, but why don't you hate him, Shiji Zhang Lufang?" Zhang Lufang sighed and said, "That's because Shiji Zhou likes Zhang Tianhe. She has been secretly in love with him for a long time, but Zhang Tianhe has a crush on Jinren Ziyuan. However, Jinren Ziyuan hangs out with Invincible Li all day long. They seem to have a good relationship. Alas, what a complicated relationship. It seems that Shiji Zhou is destined not to be happy." Deng Yu asked again, "What about you, Shiji Zhang Lufang? Do you like him?" Zhang Lufang said without hesitation, "Yes." It was one thing for Li Wudi to be good at fighting, but what was even rarer was that he was an affectionate and righteous man. As the saying goes, it's easy to find a priceless treasure, but it's hard to find a lover. If I had such a boy who liked me, I would be so happy. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other and became more and more curious about Invincible Li. Deng Yu tentatively said to Zhang Lufang, then, "Shiji Zhang Lufang, can you take us to see this Invincible Li later?" Zhang Lufang giggled and said, "Don't always call me Shiji Zhang Lufang. It's weird. Just call me Lufang. Just now, you called me Shiji and made me very happy." Deng Yu also smiled and nodded. Well, Lu Fang. Shiji, I'll follow behind you and have a look later, okay? I remember that Shibui Zhongling doesn't allow us to wander around. If she knows that we're going to the main courtyard of the mansion, I'm afraid she'll be angry. Zhang Lufang was in a good mood. She giggled and said, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. It'll be fine." The three little girls chattered all the way and followed Zhang Kongyun quickly. Soon, they arrived at the Taoist master's mansion in Mount Longhu. At this time, the Taoist master's mansion was surrounded by tourists. A group of people curiously pointed at the roof of the Taoist master's mansion. Zhang Lufang took a look and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. There was a Taoist hanging on each side of the archway of the mansion. The two Taoists were hanging motionlessly like clothes. Zhang Lufang was stunned and said, "What's going on?" At this time, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao also exclaimed, "Who did it? It's too much." Zhang Lufang stammered, "It can't be Super Li, can it? I'm afraid that only he has the courage and ability to do such a thing." At this time, Zhang Kongyun was also slightly angry. He snorted and looked at a boy in the field. Zhang Lufang saw a handsome boy and an extremely beautiful girl standing together. The two of them were talking and laughing as if there was no one else around them. They were surrounded by Taoists of the Zhengyi school. These Taoists glared at them, but they didn't dare to make a move. Zhang Lufang immediately pulled Deng Yu and pointed, exclaiming, "Look, that's Super Li." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked in the direction of her finger and suddenly trembled. Deng Yu blurted out, "Isn't he Li Yundong?" He's Super Li." Zhang Lufang said curiously, "Yes, Li Yundong is Super Li. Do you know him?" Deng Jiao was also shocked. She said softly, "He's my classmate." Well, there are indeed a lot of things to do recently. In late May, I have to go to Nanjing to participate in the Youth Creation Conference organized by the Provincial Writers Association. As a new member of the Provincial Writers Association, I also have to report. Of course, I don't dare to forget that I owe everyone one chapter. In addition, I will stay up late to write the second chapter for today. I really don't dare to owe any more. In the future, I will only be busier. If I owe any more, I really won't be able to make up for it. As for when to make up for the one chapter that I owe, I can only say I will try my best in the next few days. Alas, I have to apologize to everyone. Chapter 598. When Zhang Lufang heard Deng Jiao's words, she was so surprised that she couldn't close her mouth. She said dumbfoundedly, What? Li Yundong is your classmate? You used to. Deng Yu said straightforwardly, "Of course, I used to be a freshman at Tiannan University, and Li Yundong was my senior." Go to the net. 7 KOM. Zhang Liufang's face was full of shock. She thought to herself, the two sword souls chosen by Shibui Zhongling still have the memories of their previous lives? It can't be, right? Logically speaking, the sword souls of the Sanju formation should have removed the memories of their previous lives. How could this be? Although Deng Jiao was more introverted, she was more sensitive. She quickly noticed Zhang Liufang's abnormality and couldn't help but be a little vigilant. Deng Yu didn't notice it at all. She looked at Li Yundong in a daze and said with emotion, "I didn't expect that he was a cultivator, and he was so powerful." As she spoke, Deng Jiao was about to step forward and shout at Li Yundong. However, as soon as Deng Yu moved, she felt someone gently pulling her. Deng Yu turned her head and saw that her sister, Deng Jiao, was looking at her and shaking her head slightly. Although Deng Yu was confused, she subconsciously shut her mouth because of her understanding and trust of her sister. She rolled her eyes quickly and said to Zhang Lufang, "Shiji Lufang, what should we do now?" Although Zhang Lufang was full of doubts, she temporarily suppressed these thoughts. She shook her head and said honestly, I don't know. Let's wait and see. Master is here. It'll be fine. At this time, Zhang Kongyun also walked to the field. When the surrounding Taoist priests saw him, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, well, Shibwa Zhang is here. Zhang Kongyun frowned and walked up to Zhou Ping. He looked around and asked in a deep voice, what's going on? Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yundong. How would I know? As soon as I came back, I saw these two guys hanging from the top. Damn it, Li Yundong is too arrogant. Zhang Kongyun usually acted like an old urchin, but at this time, his face was full of anger. He shouted in a low and dignified voice, nonsense. Why didn't you let them down? Are you just going to let people watch the fun like this? Aren't you ashamed? Zhou Ping said with an ugly expression, how? There were so many people watching. It was a few meters tall. Are you going to fly up in front of everyone? Zhang Kongyun said angrily, then how did Li Yundong hang them up? Zhou Ping's face became more and more ugly after being scolded by Zhang Kongyun. She said, how would I know? As soon as I arrived, I saw these two fellows like this. Zhang Kongyun snorted angrily and said to Zhou Ping, ask two people to go to the side and prepare to pick them up. Although Zhou Ping didn't know what Zhang Kongyun was going to do, she knew that her Shishu's magical power was amazing and his spiritual power was great. Naturally, he had a way to get these two people down. She quickly turned her head and whispered a few words into the ears of the two Taoist priests beside her. The two Taoist priests nodded and quickly ran to the sides. Then, they looked at the two corpse-like Taoist priests. Zhang Kongyun didn't seem to have much luck. He glared at Li Yundong and stomped his foot slightly. This stomp seemed inconspicuous, but the mountains suddenly shook violently. The tourists around suddenly panicked and shouted, earthquake, earthquake. The two Taoists who were hanging on the eaves were shaken and immediately fell down. The two Taoists below caught them firmly. They checked the pulse of the two people and immediately felt relieved. They nodded to Zhou Ping. Zhou Ping also breathed a sigh of relief. She turned to Zhang Kongyun and said, Shishu, you are amazing. Zhang Kongyun snorted noncommittally. Are they all right? Zhou Ping sneered and said, even if Li Yundong had 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to kill the people of our Zhini school. Zhang Kongyun smiled disdainfully and said, is there something wrong with your head? He dared to hang the people of our Zhini school in front of the world. After that, he ignored Zhou Ping, who was ashamed and angry, and whose face was alternating between green and white. He walked up to Li Yundong, looked him up and down, and asked, are you Li Yundong, who is known as Invincible Li? Since Zhang Kongyun appeared in the field, Li Yundong's attention had been focused on him. He smiled, cupped his hands, and said, I dare not call myself invincible. I am Li Yundong. May I know your name, senior? Zhang Kongyun saw that Li Yundong's smile was gentle and his tone was modest. He didn't look like a surly person who could humiliate a big sect like Zhini school in front of so many people. Zhang Kongyun frowned and asked, my name is not important. What's important is, how dare you be so presumptuous here? Do you know where this is? Li Yundong smiled and said, of course I know. This is the Taoist Holy Land, the ancestral court of Zhini school. It can be called the center of Taoism in the world. It is equivalent to Jerusalem of Christianity, Mecca of Islam, and Wutai Mountain of Buddhism in the Central Plains. Zhang Kongyun said with an angry face, since you know, how dare you be so arrogant? You humiliated our sect in front of the secular people? Do you really think that you are invincible in the world and that there is no one in our Zhini school? In the face of Zhang Kongyun's stern questioning, Li Yundong said with a smile, Senior, if it were you, you would come to Mount Longhu sincerely and ask to see the leader, but you would be maliciously rejected. He said in a deep voice, what, you want to leave? Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said tit for tat, what? do you want me to stay? Zhang Kongyun said in a deep voice, Zhenrenli, you humiliated our Zhenyi school in front of so many people. If I don't get back at you, what will the cultivators in the world think of us? Su Chan, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but shout, you provoked us first. Zhang Kongyun glared at Su Chan and shouted in a low voice, how dare a little fox spirit be so presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Shut up. Zhang Kongyun's low roar contained the Jinshin Yuanqi of the Xianmen sect. The thick and pure Jinqi in his body rushed out, causing the air around him to tremble violently. The demon qi all over Su Chan's body was shaken by Zhang Kongyun's Xianmen sect's Yuanqi, and she was immediately shaken to the point that her true form was almost revealed in front of so many people here. Fortunately, when she had been cultivating with Li Yundong before, there had already been a small amount of Yuanyang qi in her body. Just as the Yin qi in her body was about to break out of her shell, this Yuanyang qi immediately grabbed the Yuanyang qi in Su Chan's body like a tree root, pulling the impetuous Yuanyang qi in her body bit by bit and bringing it down again. In an instant, a few faint fox skin patterns appeared on Su Chan's body, and the fox eyes in the corner of her eyes flashed. Su Chan hadn't expected that Zhang Kongyun would almost force her to reveal her true form just by shouting angrily at her in a low voice. She was shocked and immediately hid behind Li Yundong in horror. She said in a trembling voice, Yundong, this guy is so powerful. Zhang Kongyun saw that Su Chan had only revealed her true form a little, and then she immediately returned to her original state. He was also shocked and said with a sneer, it turns out to be the seven-tailed fox spirit. No wonder you dare to come to Mount Longhu. How dare you? Apart from the mystical silver fox and Ao Wushuang, you are the third fox spirit who dares to set foot on Mount Longhu. Humph, today you come, but you can't go. Zhang Kongyun and Wang Yuanshan used to have a very close personal relationship. The two of them were best friends, but because of the appearance of Ao Wushuang, the friendship between the two of them began to break. Zhang Kongyun begged Wang Yuanshan to turn back and let him give up Ao Wushuang, the fox spirit, and return to the Xianmen sect. However, Wang Yuanshan resolutely betrayed the sect and left, and their friendship came to an abrupt end. When Wang Yuanshan had been lured back to Mount Longhu by Yan Fang's scheme, it was Zhang Kongyun who had used himself as bait to deceive Wang Yuanshan. Even Wang Yuanshan had been caught by Zhang Kongyun himself. Zhang Kongyun still clearly remembered the scene when his best friend broke off his friendship with him. That scene made him take it to heart, so that he had a strong hatred and rejection of the fox demon in his subconscious. In Zhang Kongyun's opinion, if it hadn't been for Ao Wushuang's appearance, Wang Yuanshan would have probably become the #1 cultivator in the world. Wang Yuanshan's future could be said to have been buried in the hands of Ao Wushuang. Although Zhang Kongyun didn't know that Su Chan was also Ao Wushuang's disciple, he hated Su Chan as well. He attacked Su Chan regardless of his identity. But as soon as Zhang Kongyun moved, Li Jiandong stood in front of Su Chan and said with a sneer, Senior, it's not appropriate for a cultivator like you to attack a little girl, is it? Seeing that Li Jiandong was standing in front of him, Zhang Kongyun immediately sneered and said, just in time, I also want to see how good you are. Since you just killed a disciple of our Zhenyi school, now I'll let you have a taste of being killed. As he spoke, he took a deep breath, and the sound of his joints cracking came from all over his body. He stamped his feet, and 2 deep footprints appeared on the green bricks under his feet like cheese. The footprints went all the way up to his ankles. Mount Longhu seemed to have been stepped on by a giant. It shook violently, and the palaces and pavilions on the mountain peak shook with a loud clang. A terrifying force surged out of Zhang Kongyun's thin body and rushed toward Li Jiandong. He sneered and said, Get up. I'm so tired. I'm going to sleep. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.